Chapter 1042. Open. The bald man roared and repeated his words. The northern frontier was always a place full of miracles. Back then, the 13th prince of the Shuangjin dynasty was killed by the Blackwater army with less than 10,000 men. Now, this unknown northern frontier dragon cavalry was going to challenge the Frost Mirror Grasslands army of hundreds of thousands with only 30,000 men. It was simply crazy. However, how could the northern frontier only produce miracles once or twice? Which northern frontier citizen didn't believe that the Dragon King could create miracles time and time again? The gates on both sides of the pass slowly opened. The officer surnamed Shao reached out and adjusted his helmet. He said with a deep voice, "The Dragon King ordered us to come here and teach you barbarians of the grassland what a cavalry is. Surrender your lives. Northern Frontier Dragon Cavalry, put on your armor and raise your spears. Set out. Spears in hand, follow me. Kill the barbarian dogs, set the grassland." The cavalry behind the officer surnamed Shao raised the thick spears in their hands one after another. They roared and charged forward. They charged out of the pass that wasn't that wide. They didn't feel the slightest bit of weakness. The 30,000 men directly crashed into the hundreds of thousands of Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers. That kind of feeling didn't feel like they were fighting with fewer men. It was more like the 30,000 of them had surrounded the old Khan of the Shuangjin dynasty. "Marquis, we," the messenger trotted to the bald man's side. He looked like he wanted to say something, but he stopped himself. The bald man remained silent. He knew what his subordinate wanted to say. Even if these 30,000 cavalrymen were aggressive, the disparity in numbers was too great. This was especially true in a cavalry battle. If they were light cavalry or archers, it would be fine as long as they roamed near the enemy's main force and continuously launched effective attacks. They would be able to reap the rewards. However, the problem was that these northern frontier dragon cavalry, the bald man had lived for more than 40 years, but he had never seen this kind of cavalry. Their entire bodies were wrapped in pitch-black heavy armor. Even their helmets were covered helmets. There was a sharp protrusion at the bridge of their noses that looked like a small spearhead. Even though he didn't recognize the metal used to make these helmets, he could tell that the sharp protrusion could really be used as a weapon. If someone wearing these helmets used a headbutt, they might be able to directly pierce through the enemy's head. The eye part of the helmet that protruded upwards was a horizontal piece of steel. There were vertical holes that were chiseled into it. Even though it would affect a portion of their vision, there wouldn't be any problems if they were only charging. From another perspective, this helmet design. It had to be understood that the Frost Mirror Barbarian were most proficient in horseback riding, but there was nothing they could do about this helmet that was unless they were needles instead of arrows. Of the Frost Mirror of Barbarian soldiers. Otherwise, they definitely wouldn't be able to penetrate those vertical holes and injure the knights on horseback. Apart from the armor that had full defensive strength, their mounts were even more ridiculous. They were wrapped even more tightly than the knights on horseback. The hanging chain armor perfectly protected their legs without affecting their running. Their eyes were also covered. They were completely controlled by the knights on horseback. What was even more ridiculous was that not a single one of these mounts were normal beasts. There weren't even any hybrid beasts. They were all different types of demonic beasts. Tigers and leopards weren't rare. Of course, there were even more demonic beasts that looked like horses. Even without mentioning the armor on the outside, just the fact that all of the mounts were demonic beasts was already something that the Frost Mirror warhorses that only had the bloodline of demonic beasts couldn't compare to. Therefore, from the beginning of the establishment of this cavalry, there was only one purpose: to charge forward until they died. With such heavy equipment, the requirements for both the knights and the demonic beasts were not low. It was fine for them to charge forward, but it was simply impossible for them to be as agile as light cavalry on the battlefield. It wasn't that they couldn't turn, but the speed would be very slow. Once they increased their speed, they might lose their center of gravity and fall. It was hard to say what would happen to the demonic beasts, but the weight of the demonic beasts and the armor would probably crush one of the knight's legs in an instant. It wasn't that the Shuangjin dynasty didn't have heavy cavalry, but whose heavy cavalry was this ridiculous? If the transmigrators from Lin Yuan's previous life saw this scene, they would probably complain, "That's not a heavy cavalry. They might as well be tanks. Let's see how the battle goes first." The bald man thought about it for a moment, but in the end, he still clenched his teeth and said this. He didn't know how strong the northern frontier's dragon cavalry were, but this type of action of directly closing the gate as soon as they came out of seclusion was definitely not a problem from a strategic point of view. After all, it was the northern frontier's dragon cavalry that came out of seclusion to seek battle, not him. Moreover, they had their own mission, so no matter how he thought about it, they shouldn't choose to give up on the advantage of the past just because of their allies' frivolity, right? However, closing the gate at this type of time was simply not giving these allies any chance to back out. It was no different from stabbing them in the back. In all fairness, there wasn't a single soldier with a bottom line that was willing to do this type of thing. Meanwhile, at the same time, the old man named Tuachuo Buhua Shuangjin was even more furious. He admitted that the northern frontier was an extremely strange place, so when the officer surnamed Xiao didn't suppress his voice and instead used his astral energy to amplify it, he was truly given a fright. He thought that the northern frontier had long prepared a large army to ambush him, but when he looked carefully, he saw that there were only several tens of thousands of strangely dressed cavalry that came out of the pass. From the expressions of the soldiers guarding the pass, it seemed like they were going to close the gate at any moment. Damn, these cavalry that didn't even trust their own people threatened to take his life, and even told him what cavalry was. Wasn't this just too ridiculous? He was Tuachuo Buhua, the great chief of the Bloodstream tribe, the conqueror and protector of the Frost Mirror Plains. Even if it was Yan Xingqi. Regardless of whether or not Yan Xingqi was stabbed in the back by Lei Qiusheng, he still used an army of slaves and criminals to stop Yan Xingqi. Using the evaluations of the other imperial dynasties, he was definitely in existence on the level of a famous general. Wolf pups, these two-legged sheep of the northern frontier are looking down on us, the warriors of the grassland. The old Khan growled with a gloomy look in his eyes, "Who will fight for me and kill these strange cavalry? I will let him be the first one to charge into Shunning City and loot the wealth." Hurrah! A chief of the Frost Mirror tribe, who was wearing a wolf fur cloak, rode out and said, "The 80,000 men of the Pleasure Escape tribe are willing to share the burden of the Great Khan." Agreed. The old Khan's eyes were cold and gloomy as he said with a cold voice, "Tuachuo, remember, you must win this battle. If you return in defeat, I will remove the name of your Pleasure Escape tribe from the Frost Mirror Plains." "Ha ha ha, don't worry, Great Khan. They are just a bunch of pups who don't even know how to ride a horse." Tuachuo laughed and rode out of the army while roaring, "Men of the Pleasure Escape tribe, follow me into battle." Chapter 1043. Even among the many tribes in the Frost Mirror Prairie, Tuo Huan was in existence known for his bravery. After all, his father hadn't died yet he had already established a small tribe on his own. Not counting the old, weak, women, children, and slaves, just the Joy tribe alone had close to 200,000 control warriors. They were even more powerful than some of the Frost Mirror Khan's sons. Most importantly, Tuo Huan wasn't just one of the Frost Mirror Prairie's Khans, he was also an absolute loyalist. He had a deep friendship with the third prince and had done many things for the third prince. He also had many common topics with the 13th prince. The two often went hunting monsters in the prairie near the Hingduan Mountains, so they could be considered good friends. Therefore, no matter who the next Frost Mirror Khan was, Tuo Huan would definitely be the winner. Whether it was in terms of bravery or intelligence, Tuo Huan was the best of the younger generation in the Frost Mirror Prairie. That was why when Tuo Huan asked to join the battle, the old Khan was still quite relieved. After all, Tuo Huan was already known as the enemy of 10,000 back in the prairie. This time, he even brought 80,000 control warriors with him to plunder the northern frontier. With close to double the military strength, there was no way he would lose. Raise your spears. Maintain the formation. Charge. Command after command came out from the general surnamed Shao. As the control warriors of the Joy tribe entered the battle, the dragon riders of the northern frontier also began to move. The two cavalry forces clashed with each other, adding up to more than 100,000 people. The rumbling sound of the horses' hooves could no longer be described as thunder. The bald man who was watching the battle from the top of the mountain pass could even feel the mountain pass beneath his feet trembling. For a moment, he even had the illusion that the mountain pass would collapse at any moment. The dragon riders of the northern frontier completely ignored the arrows fired by the Joy tribe cavalry. When they were 5,000 steps away, these riders all lowered their bodies. One of their hands held onto their lances while the other pulled out black crossbows from their waists. They slowly aimed at the Joy tribe cavalry in front of them and slowly lowered the crossbows. That is. The bald man's eyes were bloodshot, as if he had seen something inconceivable. He recognized the black crossbow. It was a new war weapon created by the Ministry of Works based on the ideas provided by the Dragon King. It was named the Divine Mechanical Crossbow, and it had a range of over 8,000 paces. It could be activated by pressing the button, and it could instantly shoot out close to 100 crossbow bolts with extremely strong penetrative power. Furthermore, after firing all the bolts in the crossbow, it only needed to be replaced with a new crossbow to be able to fire a second round of shots. It could be called a killing machine on the battlefield. Even Li Zhongxing, a general who led an army by himself, could not get many of them from the Ministry of Works. Crossbowmen and the southern expedition were treated like the lifeblood of the crossbowmen. But this strange cavalry, each of them had a crossbow. The divine mechanical crossbows roared and shot out bolts. Leading over 80,000 players, Joy watched as the enemy simply ignored her arrows. Even when her arrows struck the enemy, they simply bounced to the side. Not to mention dealing any damage, they didn't even cause any hindrance to the enemy. Then, she watched as the enemy took out a crossbow. This was the last scene Tu Huan saw. The 80,000-strong Joy division was completely routed before they could inflict any casualties on the enemy. Or perhaps it could be said that the Joy division and their horses were forced back by the concentrated crossbow bolts. If not for the enemy still charging, the Joy division would instead be further and further away from the enemy. The instant the enemy escaped from the crossbow, Joy division was directly blasted into a pile of mush. Put away the crossbows. Speed up. The voice of the officer surnamed Shao sounded on the battlefield again. Immediately afterwards, all of the northern frontier dragon riders moved in unison, almost instantly putting away the divine mechanical crossbows on their backs. They adjusted their posture on their horses and gripped their lances with both hands. The heavy armored mounts under them even more so suddenly erupted with speed that was not inferior to the light cavalry. Even though this speed was only limited to charging, the pressure of running into a steel wall wasn't something anyone could endure. Apart from the Joy Division troops who were treated as dead, the surviving Joy Division cavalry directly released miserable screams. They didn't care about the consequences at all, turning their horses around and fleeing in the direction of the Shuangjin dynasty's army. Only, they forgot that the death god chasing after them could ignore the arrows. Wearing leather armor, or even without leather armor, there was no way they could reach this level. Release the arrows. Shoot them to death for this Khan. Maintain the formation. Don't let the scattered troops cause chaos. Joy Division's furious roar echoed through Frost Mirror's cavalry formation. However, no one noticed that the hands of this old Khan who claimed to have defeated Swallow Xingqi were currently trembling. He regretted it. He regretted treating the northern frontier like a soft persimmon. He regretted not listening to his third son's advice, even killing the Blood Flood Knight who came to report in his place. He shouldn't have come here. What kind of freak was this? Several tens of thousands of people were facing cavalry that was twice their size. The two sides didn't even come into contact with each other before they were defeated. During this period of time, they even completely ignored the arrows of Frostmirror's cavalry. Not only was this battle incomparably fierce, the enemy didn't even lose a single member. They continued to charge at the Shuangjin dynasty's army without slowing down. This was just too freaking ridiculous. However, the dragon riders of the northern frontier didn't hesitate in the slightest. They were extremely fast, even faster than the scattered troops. The rain of arrows aimed at the Frostmirror's cavalry fiercely smashed into the Shuangjin dynasty's army. Those seemingly thick and sturdy cavalry spears were also products of the Ministry of Works. There was a mechanism installed between the spearhead and the body of the spear. When the spearhead collided with the enemy, it would automatically break apart to prevent the recoil from the high-speed collision from shattering the hands of the cavalry. After completing a charge, the dragon riders of the northern frontier threw away the broken spears in their hands without any hesitation, just like they had practiced countless times. They pulled out the long swords on their saddles and hacked at the Frostmirror's cavalry around them as if they were slaughtering livestock. The mounts under their command also displayed the huge difference between demonic beasts and bastards. The dragon riders of the northern frontier didn't stop in the slightest, as if they wanted to run through the Shuangjin dynasty's army in a single breath. Blood and flesh flew all over the battlefield, dyeing the black armor of the northern frontier's dragon riders red. This also caused the Frostmirror's cavalry to collapse. From the moment the dragon riders of the northern frontier came out of seclusion until now, several tens of thousands of soldiers had faced several hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They had directly wiped out more than 100,000 Frostmirror's cavalry, and the northern frontier's dragon riders hadn't even lost a single member. This could no longer be described as a great victory. This was King devastating blow. Retreat first. Retreat first. The old Khan was flustered and exasperated as he ordered his personal guards to turn around and flee. At the same time, he continuously gathered the remaining troops. Chapter 1044. The bald man standing on the mountain pass was just like the soldiers under his command. His mouth was wide open as he stared blankly at the northern frontier dragon riders that were slaughtering the Frostmirror cavalry like a meat grinder. He was speechless for a long time, and his eyes were filled with respect, fear, yearning, and other complex emotions. What the hell, what the hell, what kind of monsters are they? The bald man opened his mouth and cursed after a long time. This kind of battle record, let alone a great victory, could even be described as a miracle. The way the northern frontier dragon riders slaughtered the Frostmirror cavalry was like a child pouring a pot of boiling water into an ant's nest. Before this battle, if someone told the Frostmirror barbarians that someone's cavalry could easily destroy them, they would probably pull out their swords and fight. However, after this battle, the Frostmirror barbarian would probably take a detour whenever they saw someone from the northern frontier. This wasn't teaching them how to use their cavalry. This was a direct redefinition of a cavalry unit. Let alone the fact that most of the Frostmirror barbarian cavalry were light cavalry. Even if the northern frontier dragon riders clashed with the Blood Liao cavalry, the ones who would be crushed into meat paste would probably be the Blood Liao cavalry, right? Shenlin Jun couldn't withstand this kind of charge, and the Blackwater army probably couldn't either. This cavalry was invincible. The general surnamed Xiao watched as the Frostmirror cavalry gradually disappeared into the distance. He reached out and took off his helmet, revealing a handsome face and a pair of pointy ears. It was Xiao En, who hadn't appeared in the northern frontier for a long time. Xiao En sighed, and said, "It's a pity that we don't have enough people, and we're no match for these light cavalrymen in terms of stamina. Otherwise, after this battle, we would be able to directly invade the Frostmirror grasslands and destroy an entire nation." Another northern frontier dragon rider took off his helmet, revealing a face that resembled Xiao En's. He said indifferently, "It doesn't matter. The Frostmirror tribes were defeated in this battle, so they definitely won't let the matter rest. When they return, they will definitely spend a large amount of manpower and resources to create armor similar to ours. When the time comes, the Dragon King's side should have finished deploying his forces. Two birds with one stone. First, the Shuangjin dynasty will suffer a loss, and then the Hingduan Mountains fiend beasts will suffer a loss at the hands of the Frost Mirror barbarians. After that, no matter who wins or loses, we will take over the Frost Mirror plains, and we can even plot against the Hingduan Mountains. Truly terrifying, our great Dragon King. If you don't know how to respect the great Dragon King, I can teach you. As soon as the dragon rider that resembled Shaoen finished speaking, a cold voice rang out from behind him. Soon after, a snow-white blade radiance suddenly appeared, knocking him off his horse. Even though it still didn't break through the protection of his black armor, the impact of falling from the back of a fiend beast that was close to 3 meters in length while wearing such heavy armor wasn't pleasant at all. Shaoen raised the reins, but he didn't have any intentions of mediating. Instead, he said with a grave and stern expression, "They will come again. Make preparations in advance." He didn't forget the great Dragon King's instructions before they set off. The Shuangjin dynasty had suffered a heavy blow, and the Shuangjin dynasty's authority and status were both in jeopardy. In addition, the Shuangjin dynasty was a nomadic people, so they couldn't hide in the grasslands and lick their wounds. They needed the abundant resources of the northern frontier, and the Shuangjin dynasty needed a great victory. Even if they left now, the Shuangjin dynasty would regroup and come back again. There were only 2 outcomes. Either the Shuangjin grassland tribes would exhaust most of their forces at the northern frontier's Great Wall, and the Shuangjin dynasty would still be able to sit on the throne with the help of his blood gold knights. Or the Shuangjin dynasty would be scared out of his wits and wouldn't dare to come back again. In that case, the Shuangjin grassland tribes would definitely join forces to attack the Blood Gold tribe and replace the Shuangjin dynasty with a young and strong Shuangjin dynasty. In any case, the Shuangjin barbarians were all experts in cavalry tactics. If they couldn't catch up, it wouldn't take long for the panicked Shuangjin barbarian tribes to react. The dragon riders of the northern frontier possessed unparalleled strength. Borrowing the strength of their demonic beasts, their explosive speed wasn't inferior to that of light cavalry. When paired with divine crossbows, even if they were outnumbered, they could still explode with even more firepower than the enemy. Not only were their defenses powerful, they were also impenetrable. However, their weakness was also extremely obvious. Their armor was just too heavy, and they didn't have enough time to adjust their direction. They could only maintain their charging posture as they moved forward. Moreover, their terrifying weight kept them dangerously close to the limits of what the demonic beasts and knights could bear. If they lost control, they would end up smashing themselves into meat paste. As long as they didn't clash head-on and maintained a certain degree of mobility, it wouldn't be difficult to take down this type of heavy cavalry. Of course, the dragon riders of the northern frontier led by Shaoen didn't chase after them and only defended the pass. This type of action was undoubtedly in an undefeatable position. If those Shuangjin barbarians turn around and attack, they definitely won't continue to pointlessly sacrifice themselves by exchanging fire. As such, they have 2 choices. One is to imitate your armor and equip their heavy cavalry with similar equipment. This is also the best situation to resolve. In this world, apart from me, no one understands the weaknesses of this type of troop class better than you. Of course, there's also the other situation, which is that they haven't thought of this, or they won't be able to imitate a large amount of similar equipment for their own people in a short period of time. However, the possibility of this situation isn't great, because the Blood Liao cavalry have similar equipment. As a result, the self-proclaimed Frost Mirror Khagan will definitely wait for the right opportunity to have the Blood Liao cavalry clash head-on with you. However, putting aside the difference in the materials of our armor for now, just the tactics I taught you alone will allow you to destroy the Blood Liao cavalry without suffering any casualties. Thus, what you should pay attention to is the other situation. That is, they will give up on fighting you and select a large number of heavenly star realm or even void realm cultivators to form a special unit. They will use the great strength and speed of cultivators to launch guerrilla warfare against your heavy cavalry. In this type of situation, with your current cultivation, there really is a chance that your entire army will be wiped out. Thus, you must calmly observe and think. Don't make a decision that you will regret in the heat of the moment. This was what Lin Yuan had specially warned him before they set out. Yes. Whether it was the knight who had been knocked to the ground or the knight who had attacked, they all cupped their hands and replied with solemn expressions. Chapter 1045. All the tribes in the Frost Mirror grassland gathered together. Although it was not as large as the previous attack on the northern frontier, it was not too far off. After all, it was a war between two dynasties. No matter how high the chances of winning were, no one wanted to fight. After all, the situation of the 7 dynasties was already set in stone. Even if they took over the northern frontier and the Shenwu dynasty, they would not be able to occupy much territory. Therefore, most of the tribes did not put in much effort. In the end, they still suffered 2 crushing defeats. No matter which side they came from, they did not gain any advantage. However, it was different this time. This was the Frost Mirror barbarians' favorite and most familiar plundering activity. Gathering the forces of the entire Frost Mirror grassland to attack the northern frontier, even if the northern frontier was at its peak, they might not be able to withstand such an attack, let alone now when the situation at the northern frontier was not good. The Sky Demon army was eyeing the south covetously. It was said that the southern wasteland demon Venerable and the northern frontier had a lot of conflicts. Behind them, there was also the Hingduan mountain range, where beasts were without a master. All the tribes had to be heavily guarded. Now that the Shuangjin dynasty had intervened, the northern frontier might not collapse without a fight, but it was certain that they would lose. Therefore, the Frost Mirror Khan did not even need to mobilize his forces. All the tribes in the Frost Mirror grassland gathered together. Although they were not as elite as they were in the previous war, they were not lacking in numbers. Other than the tribes that were guarding the border, even the smallest tribe had sent nearly 20,000 people. However, who would have thought that they would suffer such a crushing defeat before they could even enter the northern frontier? Good heavens! Tens of thousands of cavalrymen had instantly wiped out 80,000 cavalrymen, and they had even charged into the midst of the Reflection Frost dynasty's main army, reaping their lives like a meat grinder. Let alone in reality, even those fictional storytellers wouldn't dare to say such a thing, right? Old Khan rode on his horse with a gloomy expression, turning to look at the crestfallen remnants of his army. After a moment of thought, his expression changed abruptly as he growled, "Oh no, we've been tricked." As soon as he finished speaking, the Frost Mirror cavalrymen around him turned to look at the old Khan who initiated 2 wars and almost broke the spine of the entire prairie. Even a staunch royalist like Tuo Huan could not help but feel resentful at this moment. She secretly wondered if the old man had really gone senile. Unbeknownst to them, the Black Jiao in the Hingduan Mountains had already seen through Frost Mirror Khan's thoughts. If one had to give an example, this old Khan was like the 3rd emperor of the Ming dynasty, Zhu Di, the ancestor of the Ming dynasty. When Zhu Yuanzhang was on the throne, Zhu Di was also an absolute model of a famous general. The king of Yan of the Ming dynasty slaughtered the old subordinates of the Yuan Meng dynasty on the prairie. Zhu Di's life was like a standard protagonist template. Even when Jiangwen Emperor removed the vassals, he was considered to have endured the humiliation and carried out the important task. In the end, he successfully completed the Jingnan campaign and sat on the throne that Zhu Yuanzhang would rather pass to his grandson than him. He created the Yongle Golden Age that was talked about by countless people in the future. However, after Zhu Di sat on the dragon throne, it proved that Zhu Yuanzhang was right about this son of his. The Yongle Golden Age was not fake. During his reign, he continued the policy of Hongwu, removed the vassals, strengthened the centralization of power, and reformed the official system. After serious consideration, he felt that his father was a god but he was not. Therefore, he created the imperial cabinet, the Eastern Palace, and other institutions after the Ming dynasty. However, during this time, the imperial cabinet and the Eastern Palace were not considered powerful. They were just tools to support the imperial power. For example, the imperial cabinet was also known as the imperial cabinet. Its members were not the kind of big shots who could make the ministers go against the emperor's will with just a few words. During Zhu Di's reign, the 6 ministries and the 7 ministers were still the main force. The imperial cabinet was only used to support him in handling government affairs. In fact, Zhu Di did not really listen to the opinions of the imperial cabinet. Zhu Yuanzhang's extraordinary vigor allowed him to support the government affairs of a large and small empire. However, this kind of system was very dangerous. It was equivalent to tying the entire country to the emperor alone. If he was a wise emperor, the world would be at peace. If he was an incapable emperor, the country would not be far away. No matter what Zhu Di's original intention was to establish the imperial cabinet and what it became in the end, there was no doubt that the imperial cabinet had produced talents like Zhang Jujing who could save the empire. The reason why the old Khan and Zhu Di were similar was because the two of them were equally obstinate and self-opinionated. In his later years, Zhu Di moved the capital to Beijing because he was not used to the humid south. On one hand, the injuries left from the many years of expeditions were one of the reasons. However, it was more because Zhu Di was too ambitious. He always felt that he was still a young man in his 20s. The reason he moved the capital to Beijing was to make it convenient for him to personally go on expeditions and control the frontline war. In his entire life, he had gone on 5 expeditions to the grassland and even died on the way back from the 5th expedition. From a military point of view, his actions had indeed dealt a heavy blow to the grassland tribes. However, from a national point of view, in order to support military expenditure and civilian use, he had produced banknotes without restraint. This led to the decline of the people's livelihood in the Great Ming dynasty, which was known as the Golden Age of Yongle at that time. At the same time, he had also completely rejected the defense line that Zhu Yuanzhang and Zhu Yunwen had built with a lot of money. He had almost directly exposed the capital of the Great Ming dynasty to the vanguard of the grassland army. To put it nicely, it could be said that the king sacrificed himself for the country, and the Son of Heaven guarded the gate of the country. However, from a practical point of view, in less than 100 years after Zhu Di closed his eyes, the tragedy of the Mingyingzong, Zhu Qizhen's wooden fortress being defeated and robbed by the grassland tribes occurred. In other words, it was a shame that was branded in the entire history of the Great Ming dynasty. Indeed, the Ming dynasty did not engage in political marriages, did not cede land, and did not pay tribute. It could be said that the Ming dynasty was a role model for the Chinese dynasties. However, this did not include Zhu Qizhen, the emperor. In fact, the decline of the Ming dynasty was because of Zhu Qizhen. At this moment, the Frost Mirror Khan was the same. He was obviously old, but he was still unwilling to admit defeat. He always felt that he had the strength to look down on the world. Ignoring the advice of others, he still attacked the northern frontier. In this battle, the Ming dynasty lost to the northern frontier in terms of cavalry. This was no longer a slap in the face, but a slap in the face. It was also because of this mentality that Lin Yuan made the assertion and warned Xiao En in advance. His purpose was to use this battle to completely destroy the Shuangjin dynasty. This was the confidence that Lin Yuan had in fighting with these old foxes. As an existence who had experienced the information explosion, Lin Yuan was not afraid in front of these old foxes. Their shrewdness came from their own experience, and Lin Yuan's shrewdness came from the experience of countless heroes in history. After some investigation, he could basically find several similar models in his mind. Combined with the deduction, it was clear what the other party wanted to do, what they wanted to do, and what they would do. Chapter 1046. Those riders, they're not that scary at all. Old Khan danced on his horse and said, "Those cavalrymen are wearing heavy armor and riding demon beasts. The demon beasts are also wearing armor. Other than the terrifying crossbow bolts, they are copying our blood Liao knights. Even if their armor is stronger, it's only because their armor is thicker. Look, after we ran a certain distance away, they didn't chase after us to continue killing our warriors. It's not that they don't want to, it's that they don't have the ability." Old Khan, how do you know if they don't have the ability, or if they have deliberately created such a misconception for us, hoping to lure us back to fight, but have set a trap in advance, intending to annihilate us all outside the northern border? What should we do? At this time, a Khan from a tribe that had always been at odds with the Mirrorfrost court asked. Under normal circumstances, this tribal Khan would have been captured by the Blood Ridge Knights as soon as he finished speaking. Even his tribe might not be spared, all of them enslaved by the Blood Ridge tribe. But that wasn't the case now. 2 consecutive defeats had completely worn away the prestige the old Khan had accumulated in his youth. The tribal Khan who had always been at odds with the court was now filled with resentment. If it weren't for the fact that this wasn't a good time for internal strife, a fierce battle might have broken out right away. If they had the ability to chase after us, they would have caught up by now. The old Khan's gaze darkened. "We're almost 200 miles away and you still haven't shaken off that fear. They're no newbies, they must know that if they keep chasing after us, even if they don't wipe us out, they'll kill more than 100,000 of us. So, it must be because they don't have the ability to chase after us. That's why so what?" The tribal Khan who asked the question earlier sneered and said in a cold voice, "You mean to say that we should gather up the remaining soldiers and go back to fight that terrifying cavalry regiment to the death? Sorry, but you can go die by yourself if you want. This Khan won't accompany you." The old Khan's hands trembled as he gripped the reins. Looking at the tribal Khan who was about to turn around and leave, he growled, "Coward. A coward like you doesn't deserve to be a subject of the wolf god." "I don't deserve to be a subject of the wolf god. Then do you?" The exasperated tribal Khan turned around and shouted, "Look at what you're doing. Dragging the brave warriors of the grassland to challenge an undefeatable enemy. The Frost Empire is deteriorating day by day under your leadership. Sooner or later, the wolf god will unleash his wrath and burn you, a wretched piece of trash, to ashes." In ancient times, the Frost Mirror grassland was not a human dynasty, but a vast grassland. At that time, the ruler was a powerful demonic beast from the wolf clan. In today's world, the wolf clan on the Frost Mirror grassland was a demonic tribe that could be compared to the Hingduan Mountains. All the humans and beasts living on the Frost Mirror grassland obeyed the orders of the wolf clan of the grassland. However, there was a gap in the ancient times and the wolf clan of the grassland disappeared in this gap. It was even before the war between the humans and demons. The legend of the wolf god spread through the Frost Mirror plains, but in the end, no one had ever seen the so-called wolf god. However, there was indeed something sinister about the plains. The Frost Mirror barbarian tribe had made a lot of enemies, but they were still able to pass down their legacy to this day. No one knew the reason behind this, but the Frost Mirror barbarian tribe treated all of this as the wolf god's protection. The old Khan sneered and said, "If you want to leave, I won't stop you. However, the warriors of your tribe must cooperate with us. Therefore, in the name of the leader of the Blood Liao tribe, the guardian of the Frost Mirror grassland, and the heavenly Khan of the Shuangjin dynasty, I hereby announce that you, Ji Rentai, are banished from the Frost Mirror grassland. Go, this is my last mercy. Boys, this old fool wants to send you to your deaths. Are you going to leave with me, or?" Ji Rentai ignored the old Khan. Instead, he turned his head and looked at the warriors who followed him. He gritted his teeth and pulled out his scimitar. He pointed it at the old Khan who was riding on horseback and said, "Come with me. Kill this old bastard who is scourging the grassland." As soon as he finished speaking, the warriors of the tribe all pulled out their scimitars. It was as if they would charge at the old Khan as soon as the chief gave the order. They looked like a pack of wolves who had set their eyes on their prey. Think about your relatives in the tribe. Don't forget that you are going out to plunder the resources of the northern frontier. If you don't get the resources of the northern frontier, and if you don't get the resources of the northern frontier, and the cattle, sheep, and fodder used by the army, when winter comes, can you and your family survive the winter? Even if you are very rich, even if you suffer this loss, you can still survive this winter. But the northern region has already provoked the black flood dragon. I think you know the temperament of that black flood dragon. When winter ends, or perhaps even before winter, it will lead the northern region's army to set foot on our grasslands. When that time comes, will you still be able to live peacefully? It's not me who is scourging the grassland. It's your chief who is leading you down a path of certain death. The old Khan's eyes widened in anger as he roared, "The warriors of the grassland will not run. Do you choose to follow me and continue to attack the northern frontier, or do you choose to be a coward like your chief and run away before the army of the northern frontier sets foot on the grassland?" After these words were spoken, the eyes of the surrounding tribal warriors turned cold. After a long while, a Khan from a middle-sized tribe rode out and said in a low voice, "Old Khan, I have no intention to offend you, but you have seen the power of the northern frontier cavalry with your own eyes. I will not sit by and watch my sons go back to their deaths. Even if you want to attack the northern frontier, I hope you can choose to bypass that pass. No, I've said it before. Those cavalry are not that scary. I already have a way to deal with them." The old Khan's gaze was gloomy as he said, "Besides, even if you bypass the other passes, how can you be sure that the cavalry of the northern frontier is only a few tens of thousands? The other passes don't have such good terrain. Once you are surrounded, it would be as difficult as ascending to heaven to fight your way out. Besides, even if the other passes don't have such cavalry stationed there, it would be harder to nibble than here." The old Khan's eyes flashed as he continued, "That cavalry is very confident. They think that our cavalry cannot be compared to them. But they are wrong." Chapter 1047. Dusk. Standing on the mountain pass, Shaoen held on to the parapet in front of him as he looked in the direction where the frost mirror barbarian cavalry had disappeared. A cruel smile appeared on his face. With the terrifying eyesight he had honed as an archer, he could already see the cloud of dust in that direction. That was the trail left behind by a large number of cavalry. Judging from the scale, there were at least 200,000 of them. It was as terrifying as a sandstorm. Neither Shaun nor the bald man had any doubt that the Frost Mirror barbarian cavalry would return. To put it bluntly, the Frost Mirror barbarian cavalry had mobilized almost all the available soldiers of the barbarian cavalry to raid the northern frontier. Even the smaller tribes that weren't mobilized had followed behind the main force to see if they could take advantage of the situation. The army had consumed an astronomical amount of resources along the way. If they couldn't reach the northern frontier, who knew how many people would die in the Frost Mirror barbarian cavalry when winter came? Therefore, the current situation was that the arrow had already been knocked on the bow. If the raid against the northern territory failed, Mirror Frost Khan would have to be replaced, but all the Khans of various tribes would have to die with him. The only question was whether they would choose to take a detour and attack the northern territory from other passes, or continue to attack this pass that led straight to the grasslands, which was obviously a tough nut to crack. If it were me, I would definitely reorganize my troops and return here. The bald man's eyes flashed, and he grinned evilly. The Frost Mirror grassland only knows that the northern territory is rich, but they know nothing about the northern territory. They can't afford to take the risk, and they don't dare to take the risk. If the other passes have similar cavalry like yours, then they will waste so much time and resources, and if they realize that the result is the same, their morale will collapse instantly. Besides, the Frost Mirror barbarian cavalry's discipline has always been bad. When the time comes, their army will collapse, and it is not impossible for them to kill each other and rob each other. Since they don't know the risk, and they can't give up, then the best choice is to attack this pass. First of all, the terrain will make it easier for them to retreat, and second of all, it will be much easier for them to transport resources. Sean tapped his gauntlet on the parapet and said indifferently, "There's one more thing." "Ha!" The bald man was slightly startled, and his face revealed a look of doubt. "Confidence. He wants to take advantage of our confidence. Last time, when he entered the sentry tower's detection range, we directly opened the pass and charged at their main forces. We came into contact with heavy armor and divine crossbows and caught them off guard. Before they even realized that they had a chance of winning, they had already begun to subconsciously flee. So the next time they come back, they will definitely take advantage of our confidence. This is the reason why they chose to turn around and attack our pass. Every tribe on the grassland was good at using cavalry tactics. No matter what kind of cavalry they were, they could come and go like the wind. Therefore, the most important thing for cavalry to do in a battle was not to adjust their equipment or the strength of their mounts, but to learn how to hide. It's almost impossible to wipe out a cavalry unit in a head-on collision. As long as the other side realizes that they can't do anything, they can turn around and leave the battle. A significant portion of them will always be able to escape, and they can even turn around and eat the pursuing cavalry. Therefore, the most effective way to eliminate cavalry is to surround and strangle them. Shaoan's eyes were deep and profound, as if there were stars flickering within them. He smiled and said, "That's why cavalry commanders must learn to hide. Even in the boundless grasslands, they must find a way to hide their troops and complete the encirclement at the appropriate time. That way, they can achieve the point of annihilation." The bald man was silent for a few moments. Soon after, he straightened his body and said, "You're saying that the Shuangjin barbarian wants to take advantage of your confidence in coming out of the pass to hide a force on the side of the battlefield. When the Shueliao Knights or some other force entangle you, he will suddenly launch a surprise attack on the pass and open the pass to the northern frontier." At this thought, the bald man's face turned somewhat gloomy. He knew his own situation. The 20,000 soldiers under his command were not weak. After all, they were young and strong men who had originally lived on the northern frontier. Before Lin Yuan took charge of the northern frontier could be said to be a purgatory on earth. It was not small, but there were not many places suitable for living. Not even the 7 border cities could be considered safe. Due to the overcrowding of the cities, the people of the northern frontier who could only build villages and towns in the surrounding areas had it even harder. Every time a beast tide broke out in the Hingduan Mountains, the people of the northern frontier would suffer the most casualties. People like Zhang Shuzhu, who lived on the northern frontier near the Frost Mirror grassland, had it even worse. Every year, when a beast tide broke out in the Hingduan Mountains, the Frost Mirror tribe would plunder them. It would not be an exaggeration to say that their lives were as cheap as dogs. Even if a beast tide broke out in the Hingduan Mountains and there were no beast tides to attack the northern frontier, for the sake of survival, they still had to venture into the beast forest or the Hingduan Mountains to collect fays and hunt beasts. In the past, it was already extremely difficult to survive in the Northern Territory. Once the people of the Northern Territory formed an army, the strength they could unleash was far beyond what the old soldiers of the South and the Central Plains could compare to. However, the problem was that this time, they were not facing a beast tide sent out as cannon fodder, nor were they facing a small group of the Frost Mirror tribe's cavalry. What they were facing was the Shuangjin dynasty's Sky Khan's Blood Liao cavalry, as well as the main force gathered by the other Frost Mirror tribes. It could be said that almost all of the troops that could be mobilized in the Frost Mirror grassland were currently on their way to the northern frontier. By relying on the advantage of the pass being easy to defend and hard to attack, he could still stall for a bit of time. However, if it was as Shaoan said, if the Shuangjin barbarian tried to use the confidence of the northern frontier's dragon riders to hide a cavalry troop and launch a surprise attack on the pass, then their defensive advantage would instantly be reduced to nothing. Regardless of how many Frost Mirror barbarian cavalry their 2 armies took out, as long as the Shuangjin barbarian broke through this pass within half a month and charged into the territory of the northern frontier and began plundering and slaughtering, then it would be a great defeat for them. I suggest that we defend. The bald man stared fixedly at Xiao En and said with a sunken voice, in just half a month's time, the Blackwater army will arrive to support us. No matter how determined these barbarians are to plunder the northern frontier, there is no way they can break through the northern frontier's Great Wall's defensive line. Xiao En released a cold laugh. He shook his head and said, if we are counting on the Blackwater army, how many people do you think they have left? Last time, when the Sky Demon attacked the northern frontier, the Blackwater army's main force basically all died at the banks of Wei River. Counting on them. Ha! Chapter 1048. At the pass of the northern frontier, while Xiao En and the bald man were plotting, Lin Yuan, who had been sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, slowly opened his eyes. Night was coming. At this time, apart from the demon slayers who hunted the powerful demonic beasts, even the most experienced northern frontier hunters would retreat to areas inhabited by humans before the night completely enveloped the Hengduan Mountains and the demonic beast forest. Even at the time when Lin Yuan was in charge of the northern frontier, the unspoken rule among the hunters of the northern frontier was the same. Night was the time when the predators were active. Only the thick darkness of the night would give them the best protection, allowing the predators to quietly approach their prey. The predators who had been dormant in their nests for a day would be hungry when they came out at night. Any living creature would lose their rationality when they were hungry. Therefore, even the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce would not be active in the Hengduan Mountains at night. They would only rest in the encampments of the demonic beasts that were on good terms with the northern frontier. These soldiers of the Yun nation casually scattered some medicinal powder that repelled the demonic beasts near the encampment and set up a few hidden sentries. Were they trying to keep the predators of the Hengduan Mountains at a respectful distance? What a joke! Under the observation of the eye of God, more and more demonic beasts woke up from their deep slumber as the night grew darker. Fierce tigers shuttled through the forests, howling wolves gathered, pythons hanging from tree trunks. In a place like the Hengduan Mountains, from dusk to dawn, every hill and every forest was filled with endless killing. But tonight, the awakened predators did not crazily kill each other like in the past, nor did they hunt the weak and pitiful demonic beasts that could not return to the safety of their nests in time. Instead, they rushed in one direction in unison. Even if some predators occasionally bumped into each other, they would tacitly pretend that they did not see each other. Obviously, their target was more tempting than the delicious demonic beast's flesh. That was the area where the Northern Frontier Army was stationed. For the Yao beasts of the Hengduan Mountains, the Northern Frontier Army could release an intoxicating fragrance even from 100 li away. After all, Lin Yuan spared no effort in nurturing the cultivators of the Northern Frontier. In addition, he had a tool like the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. These cultivators from the northern frontier had all consumed all kinds of spiritual objects and Yao beasts. The remaining energy in their bodies smelled like pots after pots of nourishing soup to these Yao beasts. After all, in the 7 dynasties, not many dared to be as extravagant as Lin Yuan, specially cultivating spiritual objects and raising Yao beasts as their food. In the other dynasties, only a few trump card troops could enjoy such treatment. The covetousness of these demonic beasts was clearly not within Lin Yuan's worries. Although Li Zhongxing had been caught off guard by the Yun nation's tiger soldiers, causing him to lose his composure, Shen Lin Jun's education had not been fake. At the very least, Li Zhongxing's execution ability was rather outstanding. Under Lin Yuan's orders, he had already completely set up the camp and set up many simple but effective defensive fortifications. Not to mention the nearby predators, even if there was a beast tied in the Hengduan Mountains, they would not be able to take down this camp in a short period of time. Furthermore, there were still others to be scapegoats. The Yun nation's tiger soldiers did not gather together. Instead, they gathered in groups of 2s and 3s. This method was mainly to surround the Northern Frontier Army. What they did not know was that it was precisely because of this strategy that the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers were able to set up a gathering place in this mountain range without attracting the attacks of the Yao beasts because of their high popularity. However, this was where the problem lay. At this moment, the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers were like the outermost outposts of the Northern Frontier Army. They surrounded the Northern Frontier Army from all directions and happened to block the path of the predators. No matter where these predators came from, they would definitely encounter the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers before they collided with the Northern Frontier Army. The first batch of predators that arrived would definitely not be a match for the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers. However, one should not forget that this was the Hengduan Mountains. The number of demonic beasts here might be insufficient to deal with the combined forces of the 7 empires. However, when facing an empire or an army alone, the demonic beasts in the Hengduan Mountains could be described as endless. No matter how elite the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers were, they would still be overwhelmed by these predators. When that happened, their only way out would be to escape in the direction of the Northern Frontier Army, which they regarded as prey. However, the relationship between the Northern Frontier and the Hengduan Mountains was obvious. These predators might not give face to the Northern Frontier Army. After all, they were only weak Yao beasts that lived in the periphery of the Hengduan Mountains. It was already impressive for them to have the cultivation of the wisdom state. Lin Yuan was too lazy to make friends with them. However, the other Yao beasts that came later all had their own clans behind them. Furthermore, the Stoneclaw Forest was nearby. Even if the mountain-shaking ape clan did not arrive first, which beast king in the vicinity would not dare to not give face to Lin Yuan? All troops, get ready for battle. Lin Yuan's voice once again sounded in the command system. His tone was so calm that it did not carry any unnecessary emotions. If you discover any humans advancing towards your camp, there is no need to warn them. Just shoot them to death. At the same time, the camp set up by the Northern Frontier Army was as lively as a raging beast that had just awoken. Previously, Li Zhongxing had almost made a wrong judgment, but that was only because of his unbalanced state of mind. Speaking of which, in the current Northern Frontier, every profession actually had a certain sense of superiority. Because of the knowledge that Lin Yuan had brought from his previous life, even if it was just drawing a cat from a tiger, the average level of each profession was still better than the average value of the various dynasties in the Tianwu world. Furthermore, most people only paid attention to the environment around them. The Shuangjin dynasty. Previously, when they invaded the northern frontier and the Xinwu dynasty, more than half of the royalists were wiped out. It was said that the most favored son of the Heaven Khan had disappeared without a trace in the northern frontier. The grassland imperial court could change from the Shuel Yao tribe to another tribe at any time. The Xinwu dynasty. Ever since the sky demon had wreaked havoc in the central plains, even if no one deliberately brought it up, the fact that the Xinwu dynasty had already been destroyed was no secret. Furthermore, the commoners and cultivators of the south had all moved to the northern frontier on a large scale to develop. They had all seen it with their own eyes. The Azure River Empire. There was nothing much to say about this empire. They had been bullied by the southern wastelands demon venerate, the Outcloud Empire, and the Hengduan mountain range. Even the Endless Sea did not place them in their eyes. The most outstanding thing was that the four great powers had joined hands to attack the Xinwu dynasty. However, the Azure River Empire only dared to strut around on the Wei River. They did not dare to set foot on the territory of the Xinwu dynasty. Chapter 1049. Needless to say, most of the people in the northern frontier didn't know what was going on with the imperial dynasty. However, it was evident from the fact that every caravan from other regions bowed to the person in charge of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce when they arrived at the northern frontier. The northern frontier was currently rising in strength. As a part of the northern frontier, they also shared in the glory. However, the problem was that things like a slap in the face often came very quickly. This time, the northern frontier army had entered the Hengduan mountain range on a large scale. Although no one thought that the mission would be completed easily, no one thought that they would be caught off guard as soon as they entered the Hengduan mountain range. All the scouts that were sent out lost contact, and the logistics team couldn't catch up in time. Even they were trapped in this area and set up camp. The Northern Frontier Army was ambushed in front of their own home. If this matter was spread out, they would only be laughed at. Therefore, it didn't matter if these people were humans or monsters, it didn't make a difference to the Northern Frontier Army at this moment. Only their blood could wash away the humiliation of the Northern Frontier Army. The night was getting darker. The predators not far from this area had already collided with the tiger soldiers of the Yun Nation. One of the tiger soldiers dodged almost instinctively, dodging the attack of a golden-furred cheetah. With a backhand swing, he chopped off the cheetah's head. When he turned his head, he happened to see a thick snake tail coiling around one of his comrades. Damn it, what's going on? The tiger soldier of the Yun Nation, who had just killed the cheetah, was slightly startled. As he looked around, he saw the eyes of beasts flashing from time to time in the dense forest around him. Some were scarlet, and some were dark green, which inexplicably made him feel a chill from the bottom of his heart. The tiger soldiers of the Yun Nation were not considered weak in the periphery of the Hengduan Mountains. It was only after the Northern Frontier cooperated with various monster clans that the power structure of the Hengduan Mountains had changed to a certain extent. For example, some powerful monster clans no longer ignored the periphery and sent powerful monsters from their clans to guard the trade routes of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. At the same time, due to the circulation of various kinds of spiritual items, the strength of the monsters in various regions was actually increasing rapidly. However, if one were to push back 1 or 2 years ago, before the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce officially took action, even airborne realm cultivators could freely enter and leave the periphery of the Hengduan Mountains as long as they didn't provoke big clans such as the mountain-shaking apes. However, even though they were not weak, there was still a difference between the physiques of humans and demonic beasts. Not to mention, they were fighting in the demonic beasts' territory. Killing a group of demonic beasts that attacked them was meaningless because the smell of blood that permeated the air would not serve as a warning to other demonic beasts. Instead, it would attract even more savage and bloodthirsty predators. Whistles continued to sound one after another. The tiger soldier of the Yun Nation suddenly came back to his senses. The gathering place was under attack. Moreover, it wasn't just one gathering place that was under attack. Damn it, was the demon repellent powder we bought fake? These treacherous Northern Frontier people. The tiger soldier of the Yun Nation, who came back to his senses, had bloodshot eyes. He waved the saber in his hand and beheaded another monster that pounced on him. He rushed into the attack range of his comrades who weren't attacked by the monsters first. They formed a battle formation with their backs against each other and looked around vigilantly. Another series of whistles sounded. An obviously older tiger soldier of the Yun Nation frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "We're unlucky. The monsters that attacked our gathering place are all monsters. It should be a monster tide. This won't do. There are too many monsters in the Hengduan Mountains for us. We have to end the battle quickly. We have to kill our way out of here first and let those bastards from the Northern Frontier seize the opportunity to counterattack. We'll all die here." This tiger soldier of the Yun Nation looked to be in his early 40s. He had almost reached the age where the tiger soldiers of the Yun Nation should retire. If there were no accidents, this would be his last mission. He didn't expect to encounter a monster tide outbreak in the Hengduan Mountains. He couldn't be more unlucky. However, an old soldier still had his advantages. At least at this moment, he wouldn't act like a young man and insist on defending this gathering place or wait for the other tiger soldiers of the Yun Nation to come and support him. Instead, he quickly made the decision to break out of the encirclement first. Break out of the encirclement. It's too late. Lin Yuan, who was watching the battle through the eyes of God, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and outlined a playful smile. He said, "The Hingduan Mountains are like a hornet's nest. If you carefully bypass those dangers, nothing will happen. However, the moment the battle breaks out, it means that you have fallen into the spider web. The more you struggle, the faster you will die." Soon, the tiger soldiers of the Yun nation who tried to break out of the encirclement were pushed back by more and more monsters with despair. There were too many monsters. There were too many of these monsters. When they rushed out, they casually glanced around and saw no less than hundreds of monsters. If that was all, it would be fine. However, there were even more monsters in the distance that were crazily rushing towards them. This was really a monster tide. And the scale wasn't small. If there were that many demonic beasts in each gathering place, the total number of demonic beasts could even launch a huge beast tide that targeted the human dynasty and the Hingduan Mountains. The Yun nation could withstand a monster tide of this scale, but they had to rely on the strong city walls and various defensive fortifications. Even if the 30,000 tiger soldiers of the Yun nation were all at the Heaven Star realm, they wouldn't be able to cause much trouble in a monster tide of this scale. Not to mention that there were some monsters that weren't inferior to them in terms of combat power. Even if there were so many pigs here, they would be exhausted to death by the time they finished killing them. The whistle that conveyed the order sounded again. This time, the hearts of all the tiger soldiers of the Yun nation sank. These monster beasts came from all directions, but there were no signs of monster beasts behind them. In other words, even though the distance from the gathering point to the northern region army's encampment wasn't considered safe, the probability of them breaking out of the encirclement was much higher than directly killing their way out of the Hingduan Mountains. How ironic. They originally stayed here to intercept and kill the army of the northern frontier. Even if they couldn't annihilate them, they had to inflict heavy damage. In the end, before they could do anything, they encountered a monster tide outbreak in the Hingduan Mountains. In order to survive, they even had to break out of the encirclement in the direction of the Northern Frontier Army and seek protection from the Northern Frontier Army. But no matter what, they were all humans, right? No eggs would remain intact when the nest was overturned. When they were engulfed by the monster tide, the army of the Northern Frontier wouldn't end up well either. It was better for both sides to work together to overcome the disaster. At the very least, before the monster tide subsided, both sides were comrades that could be trusted. Chapter 1050. There was nothing wrong with the Yun tiger soldiers' train of thought. Ever since the ancient battle between the demonic beasts and humans, the demonic beasts had suffered a crushing defeat, and the remnants of the demonic beasts were chased into the Hingduan mountain range. The two races had reached a point where only one of them could survive. However, the 7 empires needed the Hingduan mountain range to keep the other 6 empires in check. Furthermore, if the human empires made a unilateral move, not only would they not be able to destroy the Hingduan mountain range, but they would also be unlucky. Furthermore, with the Heavenly Gate Guardian mediating between them, the situation had remained the same. The 7 empires and the Hingduan mountain range had divided the Tianwu continent. However, the hatred between the two races could not be erased. When night fell, these hungry demonic beasts would not care which aristocratic family or sect stood behind the humans who slept in the Hingduan mountain range. However, the Hingduan mountain range was located in the center of the Tianwu continent. If they wanted to quickly reach the territories of the other empires, passing through the Hingduan mountain range was undoubtedly the best and fastest way. Furthermore, would it be safe to travel through the territories of the various empires? If it was safe to travel through the official roads of the various empires, the large and small merchant associations in the Tianwu continent would not have to spend a lot of money to hire guards every year. They would also have to hire some experts to travel with their merchant convoys. Not to mention the roaming demonic beasts, just the endless bandits and horse bandits were enough to give these merchants a headache. In some places, the bandits were even people from the local government. During the day, they would wear official robes and chat with you. If they took a fancy to the goods in your merchant convoys, they would wait until the sky turned dark and change into night clothes. Then, they would ride a fast horse and travel unhindered. Thus, in this kind of world, one's foresight and talent aside, the most important thing was to have people at hand. Without a few famous guards and attendants in the Jianghu, traveling merchants would not even know how they died. Another thing was to have good relationships with people. After a long time in business, one would naturally make friends with both the good and the bad. Usually, you would send people money and goods, and when your caravan passed by their door, they would turn a blind eye to it. If you thought that by hiring a few powerful guards, you could run amok in the world, then you would not even know how you died. After all, which family did not have a few powerful people? Those famous people in the Lulin were either famous people who had made a name for themselves, or they had aristocratic families and sects behind them. If they really wanted to kill you, wouldn't it be as easy as playing a game? Of course, Lin Yuan's Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was obviously the exception among the exceptions. Everyone in the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was like a quail in the northern frontier. After all, there were too many ruthless people in the northern frontier. But once you left the northern frontier, no matter which aristocratic family, sect, or Lulin you were, you would have to call the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce master when you saw them. Not to mention that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was backed by Lin Yuan and the entire northern frontier. Just the relationship that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce operated today had determined that they were at the top of the merchant food chain. No matter where you went, whether you went through the Hingduan Mountains or the territories of the various dynasties, you would not be able to get around the hurdle that was the northern frontier. You want to give the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce a hard time in your territory? Then I'm sorry, but you should just stop doing business. Otherwise, every caravan that went out would die. How much money do you have to compensate for that? But then again, no matter how dangerous the environment was among humans, there were some unspoken rules that everyone had to abide by. Just like now, when they were in the Hingduan Mountains and encountered a beast tide, if there were other humans around, whether they were caravans, mercenaries, or even demon slayers, whether they knew each other or not, and whether they had a grudge or a debt of gratitude, they would have to lend a hand. At least before the beast tide retreated, everyone would be good brothers that they could entrust their backs to. But this unspoken rule obviously did not apply to the northern frontier. The ones in charge of the northern frontier were the demonic beasts, and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce had built up its business by monopolizing the Hingduan Mountains. Why would they have to side with you and defend the various demonic beasts in the Hingduan Mountains? Not to mention, the original purpose of the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers was to snipe the northern frontier troops. Therefore, when the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers broke out of the encirclement and killed the demonic beasts that chased after them with their sabers and approached the camp of the northern frontier troops, the soldiers of the northern frontier, who were already full of anger, took their positions. The temporary sentry towers were filled with archers, eyeing the increasing number of Yun Nation's tiger soldiers. In fact, the standard equipment of the northern frontier was far superior to that of the other dynasties' troops. There was no accurate figure on the maximum shooting range of the crossbows that they were equipped with, but one thing was for sure. With the equipment that was distributed by the Ministry of Works, as long as the enemy appeared in their line of sight, it was equivalent to entering their shooting range. The reason why they didn't fire wasn't because they had changed their minds and wanted to help the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers. However, Li Zhongxing had an idea and said in the command channel, "Everyone, get ready to shoot. Don't kill the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers that are approaching us. If necessary, help them stop the demonic beasts. I've seen them just now. These people are all around 40 years old and should be veterans who are about to retire. They came first to test us and see if we are hostile to them. Let's beat them at their own game and let them approach the camp." Lin Yuan also saw this scene. The commander of the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers seemed to be rational beyond common sense. When facing the outbreak of the beast tide, he first judged that the beast tide couldn't be defeated by force and had to rely on the strength of the northern frontier troops. Therefore, he ordered all the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers who could still move to approach the camp of the northern frontier troops. Some pessimists might make a seemingly reasonable judgment at the first moment: the northern frontier troops were in cahoots with the demonic beasts. Not only would they not help, but they would even join forces with the demonic beasts. This judgment was indeed valid. Lin Yuan dared to let the northern frontier troops set up camp here because he was sure that the beast tide wouldn't continue to attack after seeing the northern frontier's military flag. However, would the demonic beasts of the Hingduan Mountains really join forces with Lin Yuan so easily? The beast lord who had suppressed the Hingduan Mountains for a lifetime and was even able to protect the Jiao Xinghai from Lei Qiuxing was still recuperating somewhere in the northern frontier. The empty throne of the beast lord was left in the king of monsters' palace. Would the demonic beasts of the Hingduan Mountains allow Lin Yuan to enter the Hingduan Mountains so easily? In a desperate situation, it was better to take a gamble than to give up. The gamble was that the northern frontier troops wouldn't be able to enter the Hingduan Mountains so easily. Sooner or later, the beast tide would fight with the northern frontier troops. This wasn't a last-ditch struggle. It was the option that had the highest chance of survival after rational analysis. Chapter 1051. Of course, if that was the case, Lin Yuan wouldn't think that the other party was rational and calm. This was because a reckless man would do the same thing. Instead of waiting for death, he might as well take the risk and seek protection from the northern frontier army. But what really made Lin Yuan realize the other party's extraordinariness was the probing that was still going on at this very moment. Old soldiers were incomparably valuable assets to an army. But to the Yun nation's tiger soldiers, who didn't serve for long, the old soldiers who were about to retire were just worthless chess pieces. When necessary, they could be abandoned at any time. Therefore, while the Yun nation's tiger soldiers continued to fight against the beast tide, they quietly gathered together. At the same time, they arranged for the old soldiers who were about to retire to approach the northern frontier army camp. They wanted to use this opportunity to judge the attitude of the northern frontier army towards them. If the northern frontier army directly shot those old soldiers, they would turn around and leave without a second thought. Even if they died, they would die on the way to break out of the encirclement. They wouldn't go to the northern frontier army camp and be helpless lambs waiting to be slaughtered. But obviously, not only did Lin Yuan notice this, but so did Li Zhongxing. The rarest thing was that Li Zhongxing was still in the middle of the situation, but he was still able to connect the thoughts of the other party's commander from the fact that the old soldiers who approached him were all in their 40s. Thus, he appeased the northern frontier army who could shoot at any time and attempted to take advantage of the moment when the other party relaxed to completely annihilate them. Li Zhongxing, this person, it wasn't easy to evaluate him. He was a talented general, but his military talent was very mediocre. In other words, in the northern frontier, where there were many capable people, Li Zhongxing wasn't the best in all aspects. But obviously, he wasn't without talent. At the very least, Li Zhongxing was considered outstanding in terms of basic battlefield judgment and understanding the bigger picture from small details. But no matter what, he was able to secure his position as the military leader of the northern frontier mainly because he joined the army earlier. Between Lei Qiuxing and Lin Yuan, he gave up on Lei Qiuxing, who was fighting fiercely with Sky Demon at that time. In addition, Zhang Qilin, Gao Fenjin, and the others who joined the northern frontier at the same time were either dead or still clinging to their past glory, trying to recreate the glory of the fallen star army. Therefore, Li Zhongxing was able to control nearly half of the military force in the northern frontier. But in the end, Li Zhongxing's talent was good, but education did harm him. The Divine Forest Army unearthed Li Zhongxing's talent and gave him the corresponding education. However, the Divine Forest Army wasn't a place that could nurture a famous general of a generation. How could it nurture a tool that listened to Lei Qiuxing's orders and an elite that could charge to the front lines? Even if Li Zhongxing himself was aware of this, he still couldn't overcome his subconscious behavior most of the time. When he carried out the orders of Lin Yuan or Li Zhongxing, he could do everything well. He even added some of his own ideas to make things more perfect. But when he was asked to lead the army alone, he seemed to be at a loss. For example, this time, if Lin Yuan hadn't built a command system in advance for communication, Li Zhongxing might have been a dead man now. The northern frontier didn't lack generals who could fight well, but the military camp was simple. Strength could be respected, but no matter how much the soldiers respected you, it was actually the same. If you wanted to lead an army alone, you couldn't lack ability, seniority, and prestige. There were too many people in the northern frontier who could lead an army. Those who survived the Blackwater Army basically had the ability in this area, but to let them lead an organization alone, their prestige and qualifications were too lacking. So even if it wasn't convenient, Lin Yuan could only order Li Zhongxing to lead the army into the Hengduan Mountains. Sure enough, as the ancestors approached the place that was within an arrow's reach, the crossbowmen of the northern frontier still didn't shoot them. Instead, they continued to shoot at the beast tied behind them. This action obviously dispelled a lot of the doubts of the commander of the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers. At the same time, because the pressure of resisting the beast tide was increasing, more and more tiger soldiers began to move toward the northern frontier's military camp. Stop! Who are you people? On the sentry tower, a group of northern frontier crossbowmen lowered their bows and aimed at the approaching old soldiers. Mercenaries! We are a mercenary corps from the Yun Nation. An old soldier yelled loudly. The Chuyun Empire's terrain was filled with hills, forests, and swamps. Therefore, the service in the Chuyun Empire was mainly light and portable. Most of the people would usually wear beast fur or cloth clothes. After all, some of the swamps were heavy enough for people to pass through. If they were to bring some heavy equipment, it would instead put them in danger. In addition, there was a lot of miasma in the forests of the Chuyun Empire. Even those in the Flight Realm and Heaven Dipper Realm who could walk on air would not dare to move casually. Therefore, even the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers, who were considered heavy infantry in the Yun Nation, wore ordinary Yun Nation clothes under several layers of Thunder Marsh leather armor. It was convenient for them to take off their equipment when they encountered swamps. Then, people on both sides of the river would transport the equipment to the other side through various methods. Now, the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers who were approaching the northern frontier's military camp had already taken off their expensive Thunder Marsh leather armor and thrown it aside before they entered the sentry tower's line of sight. Therefore, they looked no different from ordinary people from the Yun Nation. Even if they still had a valiant and murderous aura, the word mercenary was enough to explain them. As for whether the equipment that they had taken off could be recovered, who would care about the value of their equipment when their lives were at stake? Why are the mercenaries of the Yun Nation loitering around the Hengduan Mountains near the northern frontier? A young general in black armor rode out of the camp on his horse and killed a night leopard that was sneaking over. He then turned to the old soldier who spoke with a cold gaze. The old soldier laughed dryly and said resentfully, "I accepted a big mission to hunt down a beast, but I didn't expect that beast to be so cunning. We chased it all the way here and didn't expect to encounter a beast tide. If it weren't for the soldiers setting up camp here, I would have definitely died here." Ha! The young general sneered, picked up the spear in his hand from the ground, and turned to the soldiers from the northern frontier who came out with him. "Capture these people first and ask the others later to find out what kind of beast could escape all the way from the Yun Nation to the northern frontier." The smile on the old soldier's face stiffened slightly, and a cold glint appeared in his eyes. Should the soldiers from the northern frontier take off their weapons, find a place to imprison them, and turn them into lambs waiting to be slaughtered? Or, should they take action now? Chapter 1052. Now that the Yun Nation's tiger soldiers were in such a situation, it was almost certain that they would die. This was because they were still unclear about the northern region's attitude towards them. If they were unarmed and guarded, even if the cultivators had decent combat strength, even if they were unarmed, they would still be unbelievably weak compared to the regular army equipped with standard weapons and armor. But what else could they do? Disperse and signal for the other soldiers to stay away. What a joke. There were demonic beasts rioting in all directions. If they had to find a way out, they could only do it in the Northern Frontiers camp. Then, your decision is. Lin Yuan looked at the old soldier who wanted to speak but stopped on second thought. He just understood one thing. The 30,000 Yun Nation's Tiger soldiers were not weak, but it would be a joke to say that they could go against the Northern Frontiers army. Unless they did not show up and just followed behind the Northern Frontiers army. They used the terrain of the Hingduan Mountains to hunt down the scattered and isolated soldiers of the Northern Frontier. But this Yun Nation's Tiger soldiers did not do that. They set up an ambush near the Stoneclaw Forest and planned to fight head-on with the Northern Frontier's army. Why? They did not have an advantage in terms of numbers, equipment, or cultivation. Perhaps they were better at fighting in the mountains than the Northern Frontier's army, but this could not make up for their disadvantage. Moreover, they chose to set up an ambush near the Stoneclaw Forest. This was undoubtedly increasing the odds of victory for the Northern Frontier's army. It was as if these people were here to die. But this obviously did not make sense. Even if the demon venerable of the southern wilderness wanted to use the deaths of these Yun Nation's Tiger soldiers to push the Northern Frontier to the opposite side of the other empires, the Yun Nation would not agree to such a stupid suggestion. The Northern Frontier's strength in all aspects could be seen with the naked eye. Without a doubt, if the Northern Frontier completely recovered the territory of the Shinwu dynasty, this new 7th dynasty would be above the other 6 empires in less than 10 years. No matter who was secretly plotting against the Northern Frontier, it was understandable that the other 6 empires would be hostile to the Northern Frontier. Under such prerequisites, it was even more impossible for the Chuyun dynasty to agree to let their trump card troop do something so meaningless. After all, the Northern Frontier was not like the other empires. The Northern Frontier could use the Hingduan Mountains to travel to any other empire at any time. Just like now, the Northern Frontier was digging a hole for the Shuangjin dynasty as they entered the Hingduan Mountains. It was not because the Shuangjin barbarian wanted to take advantage of the situation and offend Lin Yuan. Instead, in the previous war, the Frost Mirror barbarian had already suffered heavy losses. Now that they were trying to plunder the Northern Frontier, it gave Lin Yuan a good excuse to attack the Frost Mirror grassland. As for the 7 empires, they were fixed and could not be changed. Did the 7 empires have to be fixed? The Heavenly Gate Guardians. How many of the Heavenly Gate Guardians had the confidence to speak loudly in front of Lin Yuan? The Heavenly Gate Guardians did not dare to go against Lin Yuan. In that case, Lin Yuan, who had killed 2 monster kings previously, could be said to be the most powerful existence in the world. Therefore, there was a very real problem now. The decapitation operation could not deal with Lin Yuan. A single empire was no match for the Northern Frontier, especially the 2 empires that bordered Lin Yuan. One was the Shuangjin dynasty, which had suffered heavy losses, and the other was the Qingjiang dynasty, which had almost no high-level combat power on land. Even if these 2 empires worked together, they would not be a match for the Northern Frontier. As for the other empires, if they wanted to attack the Northern Frontier, they had to think of a way to pass through the Hingduan Mountains. Theoretically, it was not a problem to pass through the territories of the other empires and combine their forces. However, if their main forces left their territory and there were 1 or 2 monster hordes in the Hingduan Mountains, not everyone would be able to bear the consequences. Unless Lin Yuan's gaze became dangerous. Unless these people were really here to die. However, their purpose was not to make use of the destruction of the Tiger soldiers of the Cloud Nation to play tricks. Instead, they wanted to use this opportunity to swallow up all the troops that were currently mobilized in the Northern Frontier. Then, the outbreak of this monster horde seemed to become reasonable. The Tiger soldiers of the Cloud Nation had set up their ambush here because a large number of southern wilderness monsters had sneaked into the Hingduan Mountains. Most of the monster hordes that were chasing after the Tiger soldiers of the Cloud Nation were probably southern wilderness monsters. Once the monster hordes collided with the army of the Northern Frontier, both parties would start killing each other without knowing the reason. Even if the high-level monsters in the Hingduan Mountains wanted to stop them, it would be useless. After all, when humans fought, they would not listen to the advice of others when they were in a frenzy. Furthermore, this was a fight between monsters and humans, who already had a blood feud. In particular, the monsters that had tasted the blood of humans would lose their rationality and display their absolute bestiality. Everyone, listen to my orders. Immediately kill those tiger soldiers of the Cloud Nation. Then, everyone, get ready for battle. Prepare to confront the monster hordes. Lin Yuan's orders suddenly sounded from the command system. At this moment, almost all the tiger soldiers of the Cloud Nation that were still alive had been pushed into the sight of the Northern Frontier Army by the monster hordes. Even if a few of them managed to escape, it would not be a big problem. Anyway, although there were not many Northern Frontier people in this area, most of the subhumans who sought refuge with Lin Yuan stayed nearby. Even if the tiger soldiers of the Cloud Nation managed to escape, they would not be able to escape the pursuit of these hunters who were more proficient in mountain warfare than them. The young general who was staring at the old soldier suddenly smiled. Without waiting for the old soldier to speak, the lance in his hand had already pierced forward and instantly pierced through the old soldier's chest, lifting him up. The dozen or so tiger soldiers of the Cloud Nation that came with the old soldier did not even have time to react before they were slashed to the ground by the soldiers of the Northern Frontier who came with the young general. As for the tiger soldiers and monsters further away, they did not understand what was going on at all. All they saw was a cloud-like rain of arrows being shot out from the Northern Frontier camp. Do-do-do-do-do, poo-pu-pu-pu-pu. The sound of arrows falling to the ground and flesh being pierced by sharp weapons rang out one after another. Some of the tiger soldiers of the Cloud Nation that managed to run out of the dense forest in time stared blankly at their comrades and monsters who had been shot into sieves. Their first reaction was disbelief. How could those crossbows have such a long shooting range? Crossbowmen were not a type of soldier that could be cultivated casually. In addition to training their eyesight, hearing, and wind detection, the crossbows they used were also made with a lot of effort. If the materials were too poor, it would break with a slight pull. If the materials were too good, ordinary soldiers would not be able to draw such a crossbow. Furthermore, the strength of cultivators was always increasing, but the crossbows that were made would not grow. Therefore, crossbowmen had always been rare. Even if there were crossbowmen, they would just deal with it casually. It would be better for cultivators to release their own spells. But today, they finally realized how shallow their understanding of the crossbowman was. Chapter 1053. Long-range troops who used cold weapons were incomparable to cultivators who specialized in long-range spells. In the past, if someone said such a thing, they would probably take it seriously. But from now on, if someone said such a thing, they would definitely go up and give that person a resounding slap. Regardless of the level of the technique, the amount of energy and demonic energy consumed would not be small. Moreover, after the technique was cached, the spiritual energy would be in disorder for a period of time. Therefore, one had to wait for the surrounding spiritual energy to calm down before casting the next technique. In a one-on-one battle between cultivators, the scale of spiritual energy disorder was not large. It could be calmed down in an instant, or at most, it would only take a dozen seconds. However, in a battle between legions, tens of thousands of cultivators were casting spells at the same time. The spiritual energy disorder caused by this was not something that could be calmed down in a dozen seconds. Even Lin Yuan could not avoid such spiritual energy disorder. System skill cooldown. Therefore, legions of cultivators who specialized in long-range spells were very powerful. They could even directly attack a city and destroy all of the enemy's defensive facilities. However, in a great battle, it was already considered very impressive if such a legion could be used 3 times. But what about archers? Archers did not have any skill cooldown and did not consume much gang chi. They only needed to knock an arrow and aim at their target. Then, with a gentle release, they would take out the next arrow from the quiver. The physical strength and gang chi consumed from the beginning to the end were almost negligible. If they were paired with composite bows that had an extremely long range and metal arrows that had the effect of breaking through gang chi, they might not cause much damage to inanimate objects such as buildings. However, to cultivators, the rain of arrows that was like a dark cloud was simply the smile of the Grim Reaper. However, even if the archers, who were like the Grim Reaper, cleared a large part of the battlefield, they only managed to scare the Yun Tiger soldiers who had not yet appeared in their line of sight. To the monster tide, although this scale of arrow rain was terrifying, it was not enough to make them feel fear and retreat. This was especially so for the monsters in this area. In fact, most of them were in the realm of spiritual awakening and wisdom. They did not have much intelligence to begin with and were still in the stage of slowly learning. They were equivalent to human children and teenagers. They now only knew that there was a large amount of delicious meat in the northern frontier military camp. As long as they could eat it all, it would be very beneficial for them. Marshal Li, something is wrong. The young general, who had just returned from outside the camp, rode his horse to Li Zhongxing's side and said with a solemn expression, "Those demonic beasts, as long as they eat the flesh of the Yun Tiger soldiers, they will become very crazy and bloodthirsty. I saw several demonic beasts like that. They charged towards our camp without caring about anything else and even bumped into other demonic beasts along the way. If they really couldn't make it, they would even take the initiative to attack other demonic beasts." Li Zhongxing pondered for a moment. His eyes suddenly focused as he said, "It's a goo worm. When I was in Shenlin June, I heard that there were many goo masters in the southern wilderness and the Yun Tiger Empire. However, they are different from us orthodox cultivators. 80% of a goo master's strength is in goo worms. If they fight head-on, they might even be killed by cultivators who are of a higher realm. However, no one can predict what they will experience in the future. In order to ensure that they don't fall into a dangerous situation where their goo worms are used up, goo masters will place goo worms in food and spiritual items. Through this method, they can control some cultivators or monsters to fight for them. The demonic beasts." He paused, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He continued, "Before those Yun Tiger soldiers came here, they should have been controlled by goo masters. The monsters ate them, so the goo worms were transferred to the monsters. The purpose of these goo worms should be to kill us. That's why the monsters who planted the goo worms were so crazy." The young general's gaze turned gloomy. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Although everyone knew that the living environment in the southern wilderness and the Yun Tiger Empire was difficult and that many strange things had occurred, the existence of goo masters and goo worms wasn't a secret. It was inevitable that people would feel disgusted when they talked about it. Those who hadn't been to the southern wilderness and the Yun Tiger Empire would probably rarely hear about such things. Li Zhongxing crossed his arms in front of his chest and pondered for a moment before saying, "That's not right. It's impossible for these goo worms to control these demonic beasts so quickly. Unless, these demonic beasts originally had goo worm eggs in their bodies, but they were activated by something. Perhaps the flesh of these Yun Tiger soldiers contained some medicinal ingredients that accelerated the incubation of these goo worms. Okay, Marshal Li, don't say any more." The young general's face was a little pale. He stretched out his hand and shook it in front of Li Zhongxing. He said, "I don't want to hear such disgusting things. Just tell me what to do next." Li Zhongxing looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated. He sighed and said, "Forget it, call a few more people over. You feel disgusted just by hearing about worm eggs. If you really meet a goo master and see those worms crawling out of their nostrils and ears, won't you immediately faint?" The young general's expression became extremely complicated. However, after a while, he gritted his teeth and said, "Commander Li, right now, each camp has its own deployment and defensive area. Let me take care of the following matters." "That's right, the person you wanted us to capture alive has already been sent to your tent. If you have any other instructions, just say it." The relationship between a goo master and a goo worm is actually a symbiotic relationship. If a goo worm wants to live, other than those that live on other people's bodies and devour their flesh to grow, most goo worms need to be fed with the goo master's own blood essence. Otherwise, it is easy to sever the connection between the goo worm and the goo master, causing the goo master's painstaking efforts to refine the goo worm to go to waste. Secondly, a newborn goo worm without the goo master's nurturing is very easy to die prematurely. Thus, if my deductions are correct, then there must be a goo master nearby. Moreover, it might not be a human. You have to find a chance to kill your way into the beast tide and see if there are any existences similar to a goo master. Whether it is a human or a demonic beast, you have to capture them all. Li Zhongxing stared at the young general with a burning gaze and said in a deep voice, "If we don't remove the goo worms on these demonic beasts, we will have to fight to the death with the beast tide. Losses are one thing, but more importantly, we have yet to enter the demon beast imperial court. If we commit such a massacre in the outskirts of the Hingduan mountain range, it will definitely cause the tribes in the Hingduan mountain range to be innately hostile towards the Dragon King." Chapter 1054. Lin Yuan, who was silently observing, was also speechless. As mentioned before, Li Zhongxing was able to lead an army by himself because he was early on. His own ability was not considered top-notch. However, this man would occasionally use a crazy knife to accurately cut into the vital points. Lin Yuan himself did not think that far. After all, the demonic beasts in the periphery of the Hingduan mountain range were all cannon fodder. To be honest, unless their clan was very powerful, it would not attract anyone's attention even if their clan was suddenly wiped out. However, the key to this matter was not how many demonic beasts would die in the periphery of the Hingduan mountain range. The key now was the goo worms. If the demonic beasts in the periphery of the Hingduan mountain range could be implanted with goo worms without anyone noticing, then would it be possible for the demonic beasts in the depths of the Hingduan mountain range to be implanted with goo worms in advance? When the tiger is not in the mountain, the monkey will be the king. Lin Yuan glanced in the direction of the southern wilderness with a gloomy gaze and whispered softly. When the beast Lord Kirin was still around, although the Hingduan mountain range was not considered peaceful, it was basically an internal struggle between the various clans. It was simply a fool's dream for external forces to extend their hands into the Hingduan mountain range. However, how many days had the beast Lord Kirin been in a coma? All kinds of monsters had popped out. Although the Frost Mirror grassland could be said to be a soldier, their vitality was greatly damaged after the previous defeat. This time, they had gathered a large number of troops to invade the northern frontier. It could be seen that these Shuangjin barbarian did not take the Hingduan mountain range seriously anymore. It was the same for the Chuyun dynasty. No matter what agreement they had with the demon venerable of the southern wilderness, if it was during the reign of the beast Lord Kirin, not even the demon slayer of the Chuyun dynasty would dare to take the initiative to enter the Hingduan mountain range to look for trouble when the demon venerable of the southern wilderness was above their heads. Then there was the demon venerable of the southern wasteland. No matter how powerful this guy was, in Lin Yuan's eyes, he was just a guy who couldn't get on the stage. At least, if nothing happened to the beast Lord Qilin, this guy could only stay in the southern wilderness and bully the Qingjiang Empire and the Chuyun Empire from time to time, which had weak military combat power or weak national power. In addition to the Hingduan mountains where demons were running amok. Sometimes, if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Lin Yuan wouldn't have believed that the beast Lord Kirin called Incubus could have such a terrifying deterrent force. Just its existence alone was enough to deter all forces from going against the Hingduan mountains. And this beast Lord Kirin was very mysterious. Until now, Lin Yuan could only speculate that he had the bloodline of a prehistoric demon beast. And the things he had done were like a mystery to Lin Yuan. He was indeed very talented. In the early years, he commanded the demon beast imperial court and established the three beast kings. He flourished in the Hingduan mountains and forced the human empires to retreat again and again. Even now, they didn't dare to enter the Hingduan mountains to hunt. They only dared to take advantage of the demon beast forest. He even forced Lei Qiuxing, who was at his peak, to lower his head and let go of Zhou Xinghai, who was a remnant of the previous dynasty, who could cause chaos in the Shenwu dynasty. However, it was true that the monster beast imperial court rose to prominence because of it, but it was also in its hands. The monster beast imperial court gradually became the peacemaker in the Hingduan mountain range from being the ruler of the various monster clans. Its comprehensive strength was not even comparable to some of the larger monster clans. Maybe it was because he was pursuing his own Tao and didn't have the energy to care about the trivial matters of the demon beast imperial court. Or maybe it was because of other reasons, he started to not show off his abilities and learned how to hide his strength. However, for people like Lei Qiuxing who had faced the beast Lord Kirin before, their hearts were filled with reverence. If it was in Lin Yuan's previous life, if he was a human, he would probably be judged by others as such. A real man should be like this. After all, it was an existence that suppressed an era with its own strength. Forget it. Anyway, that old thing threw the burden to me. As the next beast lord of the Hingduan mountains, I should also have this obligation. Let me tell you guys, don't casually reach out to the Hingduan mountains, okay? 2 golden lights appeared in Lin Yuan's eyes. The incense power on the attribute panel jumped quickly, and the 1 million incense power dissipated. As a result, in the blink of an eye, 2 golden thunderbolts brewed in the sky above the Hingduan mountains and struck in the direction of the Chuyun dynasty and the Southern Wilderness Demon Range. Southern Wilderness Demon Range, inside the Demon Lord Palace. Accompanied by the roars of dragons and tigers, a pitch-black light ball flew out from the top of the 1,000-story Demon Lord Palace and collided with the golden lightning from the Hingduan mountains. That's the Demon Lord's attack. It's the Demon Lord's tiger roar. I remember the last time the Demon Lord used this move, it instantly killed more than 10 Void Realm cultivators. A group of Southern Wilderness demon beasts who were busy below the Demon Lord Palace looked at the black light ball that swept across the sky, and their eyes revealed a look of worship and fanaticism. However, this expression only lasted for a moment. That was because the black tiger roar did not even last a second under the golden divine lightning and was annihilated. In the next moment, the golden divine lightning continued to strike in the direction of the Demon Lord Palace. Boom! A loud sound was heard. A large amount of smoke and dust filled the air. An extremely angry roar vaguely sounded in the void. Black Jiao, I swear that I will not live under the same sky as you. When the dust settled, those demon beasts at the bottom saw that the 1,000-story Demon Lord Palace seemed to have been cut in half by someone. The remaining height was estimated to be less than 500 stories, and there was a huge pit in the central area. However, the strange thing was that there were no signs of building debris around. Instead of saying that it was cut in half or blasted open, it was more accurate to say that the area above 500 stories of the Demon Lord Palace was directly melted by the golden divine lightning just now. That was 2F** King terrifying. Before the group of demon beasts from the Southern Wilderness Demon Range recovered from the shock, they heard a cold voice from the sky. Although you provoked this king first, since you, the Demon Lord, have declared war, this king naturally has no reason to refuse. From today onwards, this king will wait for you to come to me in the Hingduan mountain range. If you don't dare to come, this king will personally come to you when this king loses his patience. By then, I will kill everyone in the Southern Wilderness Demon Range. What kind of godly operation was that? The group of demon beasts from the Southern Wilderness Demon Range were dumbfounded. It turned out that the roar of their demon lord just now was not a roar to vent his anger after being sneak attacked, but a conversation with an unknown powerful existence in the Hingduan mountain range across the Qingjiang dynasty. However, the problem was that this was too outrageous, wasn't it? Now that the two masters had spoken ruthlessly and so many people had heard it, wouldn't it mean that they would not stop until one of them died? How innocent were they, lowly minions, ah! Chapter 1055. One of the two bolts of golden lightning flew towards the southern wilderness and wiped out half of the demon Venerable palace. Although the elusive demon Venerable didn't die, he was most likely severely injured. He didn't even show up in front of his trusted subordinates to instruct them on the next step of the plan. Secretly, some people were already ready to make a move. This group of people could be said to have ulterior motives. Some coveted the wealth and resources produced by the gold-squandering den and the gentle village. Some had enmity with the demon Venerable and wanted to kick him when he was down. There were even many people who had offended Lin Yuan and wanted to take this opportunity to please Lin Yuan. The other golden bolt of lightning was headed for the imperial capital of the Chuyun dynasty. Or rather, it was the Chuyun Empire's throne room. At that time, the Chuyun Emperor was carrying out the night court with the civil and military officials that he valued. After all, the Chuyun Empire was never a peaceful place. The people and demonic beasts living there were already used to living at night. Other than the mortals who needed to farm or the cultivators from other places, there was basically no one in the Chuyun Empire during the day. The night court had just started, and a series of procedures had just been completed. The Chuyun Emperor had just taken his seat, and the civil and military officials stood in order. Immediately after, there was an earth-shaking disaster. Even the demon Venerable, who had shocked the Chuyun and Qingjiang empires and killed countless void realm cultivators, couldn't withstand that bolt of divine lightning. To the Chuyun Empire's imperial court, where the strongest person was only at the heaven realm, that bolt of divine lightning was a terrifying existence. In short, after the divine lightning struck, half of the imperial city was turned into ruins. Apart from a few old officials who were sick, the rest of the officials were all killed. Even the emperor of Chuyun was killed by the divine lightning. The emperor who was hit by the divine lightning did not even have a complete corpse, let alone a complete corpse. Even his ashes were not collected. No one knew why the Black Jiao in the northern frontier was so angry. However, it was obvious that the Chuyun Empire must have plotted something with the demon Venerable of the southern wilderness to enrage the Black Jiao. As for those who suffered an undeserved disaster, he could only say that he deserved it. Frankly speaking, Black Jiao's actions had undoubtedly violated the various treaties set by the guardians of the heavenly gates. In the past, even if something like this happened that angered the king of a country, the two sides would not directly start a war. Instead, they would present facts and reason, and invite the guardians of the heavenly gates to mediate. Of course, the outcome of the arbitration would mainly depend on which side had more supporters. The outcome would naturally be biased towards which side. This kind of behavior was also a way for the guardians of the heavenly gates to make the 7 great empires serve them more attentively. However, the other 6 empires were easy to deal with, but what about the northern frontier? The northern frontier was now like an airtight iron gate. Not to mention the guardians of the heavenly gates, even the local practitioners in the northern frontier would be suppressed by the officials of the northern frontier if they wanted to establish any sect or gang. Those who were stubborn would be killed without mercy. The Black Jiao had never given the guardians of the heavenly gates any face. After all, regardless of whether the demon court or other forces stood behind the Black Jiao, overall, they were much more powerful than the guardians of the heavenly gates. The rules were indeed there, but regardless of whether they were good or bad, only the weak would abide by the rules. The strong would challenge the rules, overturn the rules, and then make new rules. It was very obvious that regardless of whether the rules set by the guardians of the heavenly gates were good or bad in Lin Yuan's eyes, they would not abide by them. In fact, even if the guardians of the heavenly gates entered the northern frontier, they could forget about using their power to oppress others in the other empires. In the northern frontier, not respecting the northern frontier laws was courting death. No one was an exception to this. After all, even an existence like the king of the northern frontier had to abide by the northern frontier laws. It could indeed convince the masses. Just like how Lin Yuan never believed in the rhetoric of everyone is equal and born free. If you felt that it was unfair for others to use the things that had been accumulated for generations, then you would be the one who broke the rules of equality. Lin Yuan's concept of equality was more inclined to the world of his previous life. Whether it was officials, wealthy merchants, civilians, or even monsters, no matter what industry they engaged in the northern frontier, they had to bear the northern frontier laws. If they made a mistake, they had to be punished, regardless of their identity. The Confucian saying that no punishment can be meted out to scholar officials that was prevalent in other empires did not work in the northern frontier. Therefore, anyone with a discerning eye knew that the northern frontier had never intended to give the guardians of the heavenly gates any face. Since the guardians of the heavenly gates had gathered the most powerful group of the indigenous people of the Tianwu world, they had naturally seen through the intentions of the northern frontier long ago. However, in the end, no one dared to come out and meddle in the affairs of the northern frontier. Therefore, even if the Black Jiao broke the rules and attacked the southern wilderness and the Yun nation, no one dared to stand up and criticize the Black Jiao. You want to take revenge on the Black Jiao and the northern frontier? No problem, you can just leave on your own. After a long time, the successor of the Yun nation finally found out the reason why the Black Jiao attacked the Yun nation imperial city from the old officials who were sick and did not come to the Night Dynasty that day. The previous emperor of the Yun nation conspired with the demon venerable of the southern wilderness, intending to take control of the Hengduan mountain range while the whereabouts of the beast lord, Kirin, were unknown. In the end, they went for wool and came home shorn. Not only did they fail to take advantage of the Hengduan mountain range, but they also angered the Black Jiao, the guardians of the heavenly gates. In a branch of the Azure River Empire, Tsang, who was dressed in red, gently raised his eyebrows. His jade-white right hand gently stroked his chin, and his long and narrow peach blossom eyes flickered with an unknown light. He suddenly realized that there seemed to be a loophole in his previous plan. He had underestimated the strength of the Black Jiao. It was not the first time that his original body had dealt with the hosts chosen by the heavenly Tao origin. However, in the end, although those hosts grew at an astonishing speed, that was only the early stage. When they reached the step of being conferred a deity position, their progress was much slower than those small fries who were used as stepping stones in the past. Therefore, even though this war had lasted for countless years, Hongjun still firmly held the upper hand. The only time that Hongjun was threatened was when Luoho and the evil execution appeared. Even Hongjun himself could not fight against Luoho. He had to invite Yang Mei, Qian Kun, Shi Chen, and other powerful people who had existed since the beginning of the prehistoric era to suppress Luoho. However, this time, he actually felt the terrifying pressure that Luoho and the evil execution had brought to the 6 sages from a Black Jiao who had not matured yet. If he did not plan, that treasure might not fall into his hands as expected after the completion of the heavenly Tao origin. Chapter 1056. 2 bolts of golden lightning struck down. Lin Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly. He could feel the gaze that shrouded him. In other words, this was not the only gaze that fell on him. However, the other gazes were at most at the false god realm, which was the limit of the Tianwu world. Only this gaze, although the realm also stopped at the limit of the Tianwu world, when Lin Yuan carefully examined it, he could feel a terrifying will like a vast ocean. It was as if he was not looking at a person, but an independent world. Without a doubt, this gaze should belong to the incarnation of the Tongtian sect leader. I've gone too far. Lin Yuan muttered in his heart. It was not the first day that the incarnation of the Tongtian sect knew of his existence. However, it was obvious that the Tongtian sect leader's personality was there. Even if he treated him as a potential enemy, on the surface, he was only at the level of a monster king. He was far from being a great enemy. However, he had just used a large amount of incense power. Unlike before, when he had asked for help, this time it was Lin Yuan who had done it himself. Therefore, the incarnation of the Tongtian sect leader would most likely focus on him. However, it did not matter. After all, once some plans were carried out, he had already stepped on the path of becoming the enemy of the entire world. Although it was impossible to become a true god in the Tianwu world, at the level of a false god, one could still absorb incense power and even rely on it to maintain one's body and soul in the world, achieving a kind of immortality effect. No, it could be said that this kind of immortality was a very glorious art of immortality in his previous world for a period of time. The small blue planet was just a small world that had evolved on its own after the heavenly Tao was separated from the chaos world. How could it gather so many gods and divine systems? Not to mention the 4 ancient civilizations, just the Japanese claimed that there were 8 million gods. How ridiculous was that? Ever since Hongjun had suppressed the Earth Tao and the human Tao, the true way to live forever had been cut off. The gods that appeared later were just like the fake gods of the Tianwu world. They relied on the power of faith and incense to live forever. This was also the reason why after the calamity, after the end of the world, the dusk of the gods, they no longer showed their divinity. This was because almost all of these gods had fallen into a deep slumber with the arrival of the end of the world. Those whose faith had been severed had even fallen. They would only be mentioned occasionally, but they had no chance to reappear in the world for the time being. It was hard to say when the martial heaven world's end of the world would arrive, but the number of these false gods was not small. Often, there would be tens of thousands of false gods dividing up a region. That was why the false gods of the martial heaven world couldn't compare to Lin Yuan when it came to using the power of incense. To be more precise, it wasn't that they couldn't fight against Lin Yuan or the experts he called over. It wasn't that they couldn't accumulate the power of incense with great difficulty over the past 20 years. Naturally, they would use it to ensure their own immortality. Other than Lin Yuan, who would be so extravagant as to use incense to fight. The Tao of the totem ancient gods was far stronger than the Tao of these false gods. In fact, the totem ancient gods were the true Tao of immortality. Otherwise, the winged dragon and the yellow emperor wouldn't have joined hands to fight for the world. Their goal was only to destroy the totem ancient gods in the world and take the power of incense for their own use. In the end, Hongjun had suppressed the human Tao, and the winged dragon had taken advantage of the opportunity to trick the yellow emperor. After the Fushan talisman fusion, the winged dragon had created the dragon totem and devoured the power of incense for himself, becoming an existence akin to a god of creation. It was really good that another powerful force had been destroyed by Hongjun. As expected, the work of the system's host wasn't done by humans. Just thinking about it made him feel despair. However, as Lin Yuan and the venerable demon shouted across the sky, countless demonic beasts in the Hingduan mountain range were awakened. Black Jiao. Black Jiao. Why did he suddenly enter the Hingduan mountain range? Currently, all the demonic beast clans were fighting for the position of beast master. Although none of them were willing to give in, they all had one thing in common. That was, they all sent their most confident demonic beasts to guard the periphery of the Hingduan mountain range. Naturally, their goal was to stop the Black Jiao from entering the Hingduan mountain range. After all, the position of Beast Master was vacant. If the Beast Master Kirin had given a definite answer back then, it would have been easier to decide who would be the next Beast Master. However, the Beast Master Kirin's attitude back then was extremely ambiguous. Although all the demonic beast clans knew that he favored the Black Jiao, he had never publicly named the Black Jiao to take over the position of Beast Master. It was also because of this that they dared to fight for the position of Beast Master at this time. Although the Beast Master Kirin escaped with serious injuries, after all, no one really saw the Beast Master Kirin die. This also meant that the Beast Master Kirin might return to the Hingduan mountain range in the future. At that time, it wouldn't matter if he asked about it. After all, the new Beast Master had already been decided. Back then, he didn't name the Black Jiao to be the next Beast Master. However, a new problem appeared. Because the Beast Master Kirin didn't name anyone to take over the position, everyone wanted to fight for it. However, when the young talents of the various demonic beast clans were released to compare, other than those who overestimated their own abilities, there didn't seem to be much of a difference. When comparing the strength of each clan, there wasn't much difference. Therefore, the position of Beast Master had always been vacant. No one could gain an advantage. However, while they could fight for it, the Black Jiao couldn't. How long had it been since the Black Jiao was born? Not even 3 years. If placed in an ordinary demonic beast clan, at the age of the Black Jiao, most of them would still be young beasts that hadn't even developed their spiritual intelligence. However, the Black Jiao's cultivation was extremely high. How terrifying was the existence of the Demon King. Other than the Beast Master Kirin, who had always been hiding his strength, and the ancestors of the demonic beasts who were sleeping all over the Hingduan mountain range, no one dared to proclaim that they could fight against the Demon King, let alone kill the Demon King. However, in terms of cultivation, not to mention the young demonic beasts of the Hingduan mountain range, even the older demonic beasts who were in charge of their own clans would have to bow down to him. Looking at how the northern frontier was governed in an orderly manner and was thriving day by day, one could see that the Black Jiao was indeed talented in governing the world. Moreover, since the decline of the Hingduan mountain range, the Black Jiao was the only demonic beast who had managed to expand into the humans' territory. In addition, with the existence of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce that couldn't be given up, it could be said that if the Black Jiao were to participate in the election, the other clans would have nothing to do with it. From the sound of it, the Black Jiao was a good candidate for the Beast Master position. However, the problem was, the Black Jiao couldn't. He definitely couldn't become the next Beast Master. After all, with the Black Jiao's personality, he couldn't tolerate sand in his eyes. Not to mention the Green Swamp clan, who had a grudge against the Black Jiao. Even the clans who didn't have any interactions with the Black Jiao wouldn't allow the demonic beast palace to grow stronger under the governance of the Black Jiao. They wouldn't allow the demonic beast palace to grow stronger and stronger under the governance of the Black Jiao. Chapter 1057. It was normal for them to have such thoughts. After all, the Hingduan mountain range had become an important bargaining chip that the various empires used to keep their opponents in check. Moreover, they were getting stronger and stronger. Naturally, they didn't need to work together to survive. At this moment, there was an additional retired emperor above them. That was something that no one wanted to see. Even the humans did not wish for another mighty lord like the Beast Lord, the Qilin, to appear in the world in the early years to rule over the various races of the Hingduan mountain range and conquer the Tianwu continent. Although the Hingduan mountain range's overall strength could not be compared to the 6 great empires, the 6 great empires who were like a sheet of loose sand and even hated each other would definitely not abandon everything and join forces to fight against the Hingduan mountain range before they were truly in a desperate situation. Therefore, even if they didn't care about the personal grudges, the demonic beasts of the Hingduan mountain range wouldn't agree with Lin Yuan becoming the Beast Lord. This was because it wasn't a good thing for the Hingduan mountain range. It could even be said that once Lin Yuan became the Beast Lord, the Hingduan mountain range would be in trouble. In an instant, the group of demonic beasts rushed out of their nests towards the Stonetalan forest. At this moment, Li Zhongxing felt as if he had just woken up from a dream. He finally understood why the Dragon King added that they were prepared to fight against the demonic beasts. The demonic beasts in the periphery of the Hingduan mountain range couldn't threaten their campsite at all. After all, there were hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the northern frontier, far more than the 30,000 soldiers from the Yun Tiger Troop. In addition, they had set up their campsite and various defensive fortifications in advance. Even if all the demonic beasts near the northern frontier were summoned, they would only be killed by the defensive fortifications of this campsite, let alone the demonic beasts in the periphery of the Hingduan mountain range. The demonic beasts that the Dragon King mentioned were the powerful demonic beasts in the depths of the Hingduan mountain range. Those demonic beasts weren't something that the defensive fortifications of this campsite could withstand. In fact, it wouldn't be long before they had to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the demonic beasts in the depths of the Hingduan mountain range. In terms of the physique of their race, they were obviously at a disadvantage. But, could they retreat? Obviously not. If he had only convinced the demon beasts of the Hingduan mountain range to attack the Frost Mirror grassland, why would the Dragon King gather so many troops from the northern frontier? The beast tide that erupted from the depths of the Hingduan mountains was within Lord Dragon King's expectations from the very beginning. In fact, the current situation was deliberately led by Lord Dragon King. But what was his goal? It's to show off our strength. Li Zhongxing's eyes suddenly flashed. He bit his lips and said, "Everyone, get ready to face the beast tide from the depths of the Hingduan mountains. Remember, even if you fight to the last man, even if you are on your last breath, you must continue to fight until the Dragon King gives the order. This is an order. In this battle, we must win, not lose." Li Zhongxing did not know much about the demonic beasts of the Hingduan mountain range. In other words, his duty was not to suppress the demonic beasts of the Hingduan mountain range. The Northern Frontier Army that was formed with Zhang Qilin as the leader was the real army to defend and attack the Hingduan mountain range. However, in the game with the Shenwu dynasty, he chose the Dragon King and Zhang Qilin retained his blind loyalty to the Shenwu dynasty. Therefore, Zhang Qilin became a whetstone for the Dragon King's army of demonic beasts. However, Li Zhongxing still had some understanding of the demonic beasts. For example, the demonic beasts were a group of violent people who worshipped the strong. They also remembered to eat and not to be beaten. When there were enough benefits, they would even fight with demonic beasts that were several times stronger than them. The Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was the benefit that was enough to make the Hingduan mountain range and the Northern Frontier Army fight with their lives. Before they set off, he already understood the will of the Dragon King. The Dragon King was not interested in the position of Beast Master. At least, he was not interested in the position of Beast Master, which was like a peacemaker. However, the lack of interest in the position of Beast Master did not mean that the Northern Frontier Army would not clash with the demonic beasts of the Hingduan mountain range. The purpose of their trip was to show off the strength of the Northern Frontier Army and let the demonic beasts of the Hingduan mountain range understand one thing: the current Northern Frontier Army was no longer as weak as before. Even without the existence of the Dragon King, it was not something that the Hingduan mountain range could easily bully. If they wanted the benefits of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, they had to be prepared to fight to the death with the Northern Frontier Army. This battle in the Northern Frontier Army could only be won. Everyone, including Li Zhongxing, had to fight with the awareness that they would die. What Li Zhongxing did not know was that the empty position of Beast Master was originally a test set by the Beast Master Kirin. What the Qilin wanted was an ambitious Hingduan mountain range that was ready to attack the Tianwu world at any time. The next Beast Master would naturally not be able to maintain the quiet and inaction of the Qilin mountain range in its later years. Therefore, the demonic beast that was complacent because it had snatched the position of Beast Master would definitely not be the successor that the Qilin thought highly of. What it needed was a new king like Lin Yuan, who was disdainful of the position of Beast Master and was ready to find an opportunity to cleanse the Hingduan mountain range at any time and redefine the meaning of Beast Master. The Northern Frontier Army has a list of all trades and professions. This time, when I lead the army into battle, all the generals and soldiers are recorded in the list. After the battle, even if I die, the Northern Frontier Ministry of War will send people to the Hingduan mountain range to check the results of the battle. When the time comes, if the corpse is not found, as long as it is not in the list of survivors, it will be recorded as a deserter. According to the laws of the Northern Frontier, if a deserter's whereabouts are unknown, he will be wanted for life. If a deserter is caught, he will be killed without mercy. In addition, the family members of a deserter will be treated as criminals. They will not be able to enter the Northern Frontier Academy, not be able to work in any local government office, not be able to join the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, and not be able to enjoy the benefits of being a citizen of the Northern Frontier. Every troop has the right to supervise. If a deserter appears in their troop, they will be punished as a whole. If a deserter appears in each troop, one of the deserters will be punished as a deserter. However, the family members will not be implicated. If 3 or more deserters appear in each troop, they will be treated as deserters and will be punished according to the laws of the northern frontier. Li Zhongxing's voice sounded in the command channel. Instantly, many people's hearts sank. The northern frontier was indeed a place that was regarded as a paradise. The craftsmanship of all trades and professions was better than that of other dynasties. As long as one was talented, the officials of the northern frontier would provide for them to study in the Northern Frontier Academy. Even ordinary people had certain benefits in the northern frontier. At the very least, there was the concept of retirement in the northern frontier. When one reached a certain age, even if they no longer worked, the officials of the northern frontier would provide for these old people. Moreover, there were all kinds of work-related injury compensation, insurance, and the like. It could be said that as long as one was willing to work in the northern frontier, they would be able to live a good life. There was no need to worry about having no one to rely on or support the young. Of course, the prerequisite was that they did not violate the laws of the northern frontier. Chapter 1058. Everyone had to abide by the laws of the northern frontier. However, the officials of the northern frontier never emphasized this because everyone in the northern frontier would subconsciously remember the provisions of the laws of the northern frontier. Although the laws of the northern frontier could be said to be numerous, they were not excessive. It would not require you to be a saint, but it would not allow you to degenerate into a scum who did not even have a bottom line. Moreover, not all the laws of the northern frontier required you to do something. Most of them were for protection. For example, if you worked for an aristocratic family and the aristocratic family was unwilling to pay you, you could go to the judicial office of the northern frontier. They would naturally help you to get back the payment you deserved. They would even help you to get a sizable amount of compensation based on the severity of the case. In addition, for disaster prevention such as theft and murder, which no one in other dynasties would be willing to deal with, as long as you reported a case to the northern frontier, not to mention the constables of the judicial office, even the association of the demon emperor and the embroidered uniform guards would send people to assist in the investigation. Moreover, in contrast to the numerous laws of the northern frontier, the officials of the northern frontier also took care of all the welfare of the citizens of the northern frontier. However, when you violated the laws of the northern frontier, it also meant that you and your immediate family would lose these corresponding benefits. Li Zhongxing rarely talked about the laws of the northern frontier because the military camp had its own military laws. However, no matter how strict the military laws were, it was impossible for everyone to obey them. However, after Li Zhongxing finished speaking, everyone realized one thing: if they deserted, even if they were lucky enough to survive, they would not be able to raise their heads in the future. They might even implicate their own family members. If they could not escape, they could only fight. No matter who the opponent was, no matter how many opponents there were, they only needed to know 2 things: to kill the enemy and to survive. Li Zhongxing's action stunned Lin Yuan slightly. Since when could the laws of the northern frontier be used to boost morale? It's so fancy. Lin Yuan muttered softly, but his mood was inexplicably much better. Entering the Hingduan mountain range this time was part of his plan, but from another perspective, he was also gambling. He bet that the soldiers of the northern frontier would definitely be able to defeat those angry demon beasts. If he won the bet, everything would be fine. No matter where Lin Yuan placed his pieces, it would be very easy. However, if he lost the bet this time, the price he had to pay would be equally tragic. For example, the northern frontier army that entered the Hingduan mountains this time could be said to be all the manpower that could be mobilized by the northern frontier. If they were all buried here, all of Lin Yuan's subsequent actions would be restricted. It was true that the northern region was blessed by the power of the heavenly Tao. Whether it was the speed of the birth of talents or the growth of cultivators, it was far superior to the other forces. However, there was one thing that remained unchanged: population. The population of the northern frontier was limited. Even if there were immigrants from the Central Plains, the South, and even other dynasties, the population of the northern frontier still couldn't reach the peak of the Shenwu dynasty. Moreover, a considerable portion of mortals, as well as the old, weak, women, and children who couldn't fight, had to be excluded. Even if all aspects of the northern frontier were growing with each passing day, the population base was still there. As a result, the northern frontier had never carried out any military expansion. Apart from the Northern Frontier Army, Southern Expedition Army, and Falling Star Army, the Blackwater Army and Northern Frontier Dragon Cavalry were all selected from the Northern Frontier Academy and the demi-humans of the Northern Frontier. It wasn't that Lin Yuan didn't want to, but that the Northern Frontier couldn't handle a large expansion unless he could wait for the Northern Frontier to develop for another 10 or 20 years. However, time was clearly not on his side, because the world was about to be completed. Of course, Lin Yuan could create a large number of system creations, as well as a large number of grayscaled flood dragon people. However, putting aside the fact that the former would cost Lin Yuan a large amount of attribute points, the latter were monsters that couldn't be tolerated by the Tianwu continent. Just the time it would take for these two to mature was about the same as waiting for the northern frontier to develop on its own. Lin Yuan wasn't stupid enough to consider this kind of action that was like drinking poison to quench one's thirst. In particular, the amount of incense power needed to create these monsters was no different from using a knife to cut off a piece of flesh from Lin Yuan's body. The monsters in the Hingduan mountain range were both shocked and furious, while the soldiers of the northern frontier were also resolute. Both sides didn't even have the time to negotiate before they fiercely clashed against each other. Countless monsters fell to the crossbows in the process of charging, while countless soldiers of the northern frontier were sent flying by the monsters. In less than the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the fortifications that took an entire day to build were completely destroyed. Even the sentry towers that the archers were standing on were destroyed by the monsters' techniques. In just the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, this battle had changed from a defensive battle to a field battle of close combat. The pungent smell of blood began to spread. At the same time, it attracted a large number of predators that could have stayed out of the battle. The gazes of Lin Yuan and the countless beast kings in the Hingduan mountain range were all fixed on this tragic battle. Blood flowed like a river, and corpses were strewn everywhere. Corpses of humans and monsters could be seen everywhere. Humans and monsters were in the midst of killing one another. Spiritual chi of various attributes constantly condensed, dissipated, became chaotic, calmed down, and condensed again, circulating in this world. Outside the Hingduan mountain range, there were also countless gazes observing this scene. What shocked the experts of the various dynasties was not the tragedy of the battle, but the terrifying fighting spirit of the soldiers of the northern frontier. What were they doing? Why were they doing this? They could not understand. At first, these soldiers of the northern frontier relied on the barracks to fight against the monsters. After the fortifications were destroyed, the battlefield directly expanded to the entire mountain range. When the crossbows in their hands ran out of arrows, they pulled out their demon swords to fight. When their spears broke, they raised their shields to smash and smash. Later on, even their battle swords broke and bent. They began to hit, kick, and bite. Everyone's eyes were bloodshot, and their movements were swift and violent. Even if they knew that they would die, they would not hesitate to continue fighting. From the beginning to the end, not a single one of them ran away. Not a single one of them died with their backs facing the monsters. There was even a soldier of the northern frontier who was still biting his opponent's flesh when he was entangled by a python. Before his bones and tendons broke, he had forcefully bitten his opponent 7 inches. The experts who witnessed all of this felt their hearts palpitate. The monsters of the Hingduan mountain range were also palpitating. These people were not humans at all. They were lunatics, devils, and existences that were more like monsters than monsters. No one knew what was supporting these soldiers of the northern frontier to fight so crazily. However, they could all see that the monster tide that had never retreated actually began to stagnate under the counterattack of these lunatics. It was as if they did not dare to fight against the other party anymore. Chapter 1059. It was worth mentioning that after reaching the heavenly strength realm, due to the qualitative change in the vital energy in the human body, their physical fitness would also increase by more than one level. This was especially so for Guan Zhaoshan, who had a special physique. After completing the qualitative change from the airborne realm to the heavenly strength realm, their physical fitness would increase by an even greater number. Therefore, even in a field battle, even if the humans were still at a disadvantage, it was not impossible for them to fight against the monsters. However, the physique was not the biggest shackle that prevented humans from defeating the monsters in a field battle. In ancient times, the ancestors of the monsters were much stronger and wilder than the monsters of today. At that time, humans did not have any strong cities or sharp weapons, but they were able to rely on their physical fitness and various weapons and tools that seemed extremely backward today to almost wipe out the entire group of monsters. The humans of today were living too comfortably. They lived behind the sturdy city walls, protected by all kinds of defensive equipment and formations. In the face of the demon beasts that were no longer as strong as their ancestors, they only needed to defend the cities at the border every year, and they would be able to harvest a large number of demon beast corpses. They had already lost the determination and passion to fight against the monsters in the field. This was unavoidable because of the degradation caused by the advancement of science and technology. However, no one had ever noticed this problem. Even if they had noticed it, they could not do anything about it. They could not tell the various dynasties and the high and mighty guardians of the heavenly gate to switch to the path of cultivation and stop adding skill points to the science and technology tree, right? Therefore, slowly, humans went from being at a disadvantage to being completely defeated in a field battle. It was almost a foregone conclusion. However, at the same time, countless years later, an army that had been established for less than a fraction of the time as compared to the armies of the other dynasties had fought to a stalemate with the terrifying beast tide that came from the depths of the Hingduan Mountains, the territory of the monster beasts. No, this might be a little biased. However, these incomparably valiant soldiers of the northern region had indeed fought against the demonic beasts in the field. They had even managed to stop the demonic beasts from advancing with their inexplicable courage and craziness. For a moment, the demonic beasts could not even tell who was the ferocious demonic beast. This scene fell into the eyes of many people. At most, the high and mighty guardians of the heavenly gate were surprised. However, in the eyes of the top powerhouses of the 6 dynasties, it was not the case. There was a very interesting phenomenon in Lin Yuan's previous life. Every time the dynasty changed on the Asian continent, a powerful armed force would replace the once powerful but gradually declining armed force. It was the same even when the Yellow Emperor replaced the Yen Emperor. In other words, it was from the Yellow Emperor that the saying of conquest appeared when the imperial power of humans changed. Of course, the change of feudal imperial power was basically a game between the aristocratic families. Although there were peasant uprisings that swept the world like the Great Ming Dynasty, it was very rare. Since ancient times, most peasant uprisings were used as training targets for the various dynasties. The more successful one was the Yellow Turban Uprising at the end of the Eastern Han Dynasty. Although it was still destroyed by the Eastern Han Dynasty, it ushered in a chaotic world. The decline of an armed force depended on many factors. For example, if a dynasty was established for too long and everything was tied to the wisdom of the emperor, there would be a lot of decadent and outdated rules. Even if there was a wise emperor, it would be difficult for him to compete with all the important ministers and aristocratic families in the world to abolish or change these decadent rules. A typical example was the Great Ming Dynasty. In the beginning, imperial power was supreme, but later on, civil and military officials competed with each other. Later on, power completely fell into the competition between the eunuchs and the Confucian scholars. Another example was when a dynasty had been stable for too long and suddenly encountered a strong enemy and suffered a loss. Those important ministers in the court swore to die and refused to submit, but later on, those who were stubborn were all killed. Only those who knew how to kneel and speak were left, and only those who knew how to pander to a strong enemy were left. A typical example was the Great Song dynasty. In terms of population, wealth, and military power, even the Great Tang dynasty could not compare to it. However, in foreign wars, the Great Song dynasty had always been suppressed. These factors might have appeared in the heaven martial world before, but with the average lifespan of the people in the heaven martial world, the monitoring of the heavenly gate guardians, the threat of the Hengduan mountain range and the endless sea, it was not unreasonable for the 7 great dynasties to exist for so many years. It was only in recent years that variables like Lei Qiuxing and Lin Yuan appeared. The most important thing was that the various great dynasties had never had a problem with their armaments. No matter which dynasty it was, they had fought many foreign wars. Every year, it was normal for them to fight against the Hengduan mountain range's beast tide. No one knew better than the top experts of the various dynasties what it meant to face an army more ferocious than the demonic beasts. This was especially true for the Qingjiang dynasty, which bordered the northern frontier. Even the natural barrier of the Great River was like a joke in front of the northern frontier. At this moment, they were all silent about the war between the northern frontier and the demonic beasts. For a long time, no one dared to say anything because they knew very well that if the northern frontier had any intention of destroying them, their country would be destroyed in a day's time. At the same time, Frost Mirror Khan, who had received the news, was also covered in cold sweat. Even the Shuangjin dynasty, which also did not build a strong city, did not dare to face the demonic beasts head-on like the northern frontier. They could only rely on the speed of their warhorses to continuously attack and exhaust or eliminate small groups of demonic beasts. They seemed to have unknowingly provoked an extremely terrifying enemy. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that although the northern frontier army had the upper hand for a while, it was only temporary. After all, this was the Hengduan mountain range. The demonic beasts seemed to be endless. Even if the 6 dynasties joined forces to attack, the demonic beasts would still feel a little overwhelmed. However, it did not mean that the demonic beasts were completely helpless. However, only the northern frontier army was here. This meant that the northern frontier army was fighting against the entire Hengduan mountain range's demonic beasts by themselves. Perhaps it would not be long before the demonic beasts that kept emerging from the Hengduan mountain range would completely destroy the seemingly unstoppable northern frontier army. For a moment, the experts of the 6 dynasties had mixed feelings. They did not know how to describe their feelings at this moment. Although the northern frontier was under the command of the Black Jiao, it was indeed divided into human dynasties. It was even decided that the 7th dynasty would be the northern frontier's allies. From the perspective of humans, they hoped that the northern frontier would win. Chapter 1060. However, the problem was that the actual ruler of the northern frontier was the Black Jiao. The northern frontier had indeed relied on the Hengduan mountain range to grow so quickly. In the eyes of the 6 dynasties, this was no different from a dogfight. If the actual ruler of the northern frontier was Li Zhong, the 6 dynasties would not hesitate at all. They would have gathered their troops and charged into the Hengduan mountain range to relieve the pressure on their allies. At the same time, they would have plundered the Hengduan mountain range ruthlessly. Therefore, from the perspective of these people, they hoped that the northern frontier army would lose. It was very contradictory and complicated. It's about time, right? Lin Yuan, who did not plan to care about the thoughts of the other forces, mumbled softly. His attack on the Hengduan mountain range this time was not just to show off to the monsters in the Hengduan mountain range. More importantly, he wanted to let those people understand that the current military strength of the northern frontier had reached the point where they could attack the Hengduan mountain range on their own. Next, the northern frontier would use the Shuangjin dynasty's invasion as an excuse to attack the Shuangjin dynasty en masse. They would basically take over a large area of territory, and no one would dare to raise any objections. They would even have to think about whether they would become the next target of the northern frontier if they did so. If it was a battle between two dynasties, those dynasties that were further away could naturally take sides. However, it was different for the northern frontier. The army of the northern frontier could pass through the Hingduan mountain range at any time. This natural barrier that the other dynasties were helpless against was the best route for the northern frontier to send troops. Apart from the Qingjiang dynasty and the Shuangjin dynasty, the other four dynasties were also within the northern frontier's attack range. Soon, another monster horde formed by monsters appeared on the battlefield. However, the main body of this monster horde was basically the mountain-shaking ape, nine-colored deer, diamond ape, and other monsters from the Stoneclaw forest. In other words, these were all Lin Yuan's subordinates. What was even more interesting was that even though the Stoneclaw forest was located in the outer region of the Hingduan mountains, after the recent changes, the demonic beasts under the Beast Lord Kirin and the three Beast Kings broke out of the encirclement and disappeared one after another. Furthermore, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce deliberately gave resources to these demonic beasts, and the Northern Frontier Ministry of Works created equipment for these demonic beasts. These demonic beasts in the tribes near the Stoneclaw forest could be considered one of the top demonic beasts in the Hingduan mountains. When they gathered together, even those large demonic beasts with countless years of history would have to bow their heads. When human technology was combined with even more ferocious and valiant demon beasts, the demon beasts in the vicinity of the Stoneclaw forest had already become existences in a different dimension compared to the other demon beasts. If even a human wearing a variety of equipment could contend against a demonic beast, then how terrifying would a demonic beast wearing custom-made equipment be? Not long after, another beast horde charged into the battlefield. The leader was a pitch-black ape with hands that looked like prawn pincers. That was Moro, the first demon beast created by Lin Yuan, or rather, the Inferno demon beast. Behind it was a mighty army of Inferno demon beasts that were born in the Scarlet Flame Swamp. Although Lin Yuan hadn't set foot in the Hingduan mountains for a long time, he had never stopped making arrangements in the Hingduan mountains. He had already done something like showing off his muscles, so it wouldn't be good if he continued to hide it. Before the various forces could recover from their shock, another group of cavalrymen appeared in the vicinity of the demon beast forest. These cavalrymen basically had some beast characteristics on their bodies. The armor they wore and the weapons they held in their hands were all products of the Northern Frontier Ministry of Works. The demon beasts under their command were mainly horses, deer, and wolves. They were all demonic beasts that lived on the side of the demon beast forest near the northern frontier. Although it had long been known that Black Jiao had been secretly subduing the demonic beasts, such as Kagura, Shao En, and other outstanding demonic beasts, all of them had basically taken refuge under Lin Yuan's command. No one knew how many demonic beasts there were under Lin Yuan's command. But today, these demonic beasts from the northern frontier directly showed their weapons. There are so many of them. There are at least 500,000 of them. It's almost the total combat power of the demonic beasts from the entire northern frontier. An expert from Xinjiang who was watching the battle sucked in a breath of cold air. He gritted his teeth and said, "If our intelligence system is correct, then all the demonic beasts from the northern frontier have taken refuge under Black Jiao's command. Even some of the demonic beasts' forests near the northern frontier are the same. Many of the demonic beasts' forests' warhorses are the specialties of the Frost Mirror grassland. They are the warhorses of the Frost Mirror cavalry, which is not something that can be bought with money. There must be some demonic beasts that help the Frost Mirror cavalry to raise horses that have taken refuge in the northern frontier." The demonic beast's sudden appearance caught everyone off guard. Who would have thought that Black Jiao, who had been operating the northern frontier and was even active in the Endless Sea not long ago, had unknowingly taken in all the demonic beasts nearby? They also didn't know why the number of demon beasts under Lin Yuan's command far exceeded the detailed number reported by their intelligence personnel. At this moment, they only knew one thing. The Hingduan Mountains were in trouble. Moreover, the Shuangjin dynasty, which was currently attacking the northern frontier, was also in trouble. But the problem was, they could ignore the demon beasts in the Hingduan mountains, but could they ignore the barbarians in the Frost Mirror Prairie? Yes, everyone had to admit that the Shuangjin barbarian, who seemed to have a screw loose in their heads and only knew how to kill and plunder, did not have a good relationship with others. This was especially true for the Shinwu dynasty and the Kumu dynasty, which were neighboring the Frost Mirror Prairie. They couldn't wait to tear the barbarians in the prairie apart. Even if the Shuangjin dynasty didn't border the Frost Mirror Prairie, whose caravans hadn't been robbed and killed by the barbarians. Many tribes on the Frost Mirror grassland had been wiped out by some powerful forces because they had robbed something they shouldn't have and killed someone they shouldn't have. At the very least, they would find quests in the mercenary guild to wipe out these tribes. But while the barbarians were detestable, their nomadic customs also limited their range of activity. If they didn't have the terrain of the grasslands, the combat strength that the barbarians could display would be nothing compared to the demonic beasts when they fought in positional warfare and mountainous warfare. Ignore it. Watch the Black Jiao devour the Frost Mirror Prairie. But even if they did, it would be useless. After all, no matter how fast the cultivators could run, they couldn't reach the battlefield immediately. Besides, the cultivators in the military weren't very strong individually. They mainly practiced all kinds of battle formations and joint attacks. 80% of them would be exhausted if they tried to fly to the northern land or the Frost Mirror grassland from their own territory like ordinary cultivators. If they ran into a ferocious army like the northern land, wouldn't they be lining up to deliver their heads to the enemy? Wouldn't that give the Black Flood Dragon an excuse to attack them after they delivered their heads to the enemy?